For 10 months, my family forgot I existed. Then my phone rang. It was my father demanding I wire $40,000 for my brother's wedding florist because his corporate cards were mysteriously declining. When I refused, he threatened to write me out of the family legacy. What he did not know was that I had spent those 10 months quietly buying up his debt, and I was already the sole trustee of the estate he was threatening to withhold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old and a senior corporate liquidator in New York City. The ringing of my phone shattered the quiet hum of my corner office overlooking Manhattan. The caller ID flashed Richard, my father. It had been exactly 10 months since my relocation from Atlanta. 10 months of total radio silence. There were no texts checking in on my new apartment. There were no calls asking about my recent promotion. There was just absolute silence until they needed a financial bailout. I answered the call. I did not even get a chance to say hello or ask how his day was going. Maya, your brother's corporate card is frozen and the wedding is in 2 days. I need you to wire $40,000 to the florist by noon today. This family raised you and put a roof over your head. It is time you pay it back. My father's voice was loud enough that my executive assistant, who was dropping off a confidential file, paused in the doorway. I calmly waved her away and leaned back in my heavy leather chair. My brother Marcus was 31 and supposedly the self-made chief executive officer of our family logistics company, a company that my grandfather built from the ground up with sweat and tears. But Marcus treated like a personal piggy bank for his luxury car leases and custom designer suits. I am not sending Marcus a single dime, Dad. The line went dead quiet for a second before the inevitable explosion. How dare you? Your brother is marrying into the Boston elite. Chloe's family expects a certain standard, and we will not be humiliated because you are throwing a jealous tantrum. You have always been bitter that Marcus took over the business instead of you. It was almost laughable. I was not bitter at all. I was highly compensated to manage massive financial crises for Fortune 500 companies. I knew exactly why his corporate credit cards were declining. But my father was not interested in facts or accounting ledgers. He only cared about high society appearances. If you do not wire that money by noon, do not bother showing your face at the rehearsal dinner. In fact, do not bother calling yourself a part of this family. I will call the lawyers and write you out of the legacy entirely. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that he could not see over the phone. Okay, Dad, I will see you in Atlanta. I hung up the phone before he could scream another insult. He thought he had won the argument. He thought the heavy threat of losing my inheritance would force me back into my lifelong role as the obedient family scapegoat. The reliable human automated teller machine who fixed everyone else's careless mistakes while Marcus received all the glory and praise. I stood up and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. Below me, the city moved fast and ruthless, just like I had learned to be. I did not need their money. Over the past 10 months, I had not just been building my corporate career. I had been executing the final legal wishes of my late grandmother, a massive secret she entrusted only to me because she knew exactly what my father and brother would do to her hard-earned generational wealth. I opened my hidden wall safe and pulled out a thick red legal folder. Inside were the heavily authenticated documents naming me as the sole trustee of her entire estate, an estate my father mistakenly believed was automatically transitioning to his control after the wedding. Accompanying those estate papers was a separate aggressive acquisition portfolio from my firm. My team had quietly purchased the defaulted debt of my father's failing logistics company for absolute pennies on the dollar. I packed a single black leather overnight bag. I did not pack the brightly colored cheap bridesmaid dress or the uncomfortable matching shoes my mother had aggressively dictated I wear. I packed a custom-tailored black silk gown. I was not going to a joyful celebration. I was going to a corporate execution. I booked a first-class ticket to Atlanta for that very evening. The smooth flight gave me plenty of quiet time to review the disastrous financials one last time. Marcus was in the hole for over $2 million. He was funding a $200,000 luxury wedding on credit he absolutely did not have, just to impress a woman who constantly made snide racist microaggressions about our family's background. When I landed in Atlanta, the thick, humid southern air hit me instantly. I bypassed the crowded rental car counter and ordered a private black car service directly to the luxury hotel where the wedding party had obnoxiously taken over 2 entire floors. As I walked through the heavy revolving doors of the five-star lobby, the giant crystal chandeliers cast a bright, arrogant light over the pristine marble floors. I spotted them immediately. Marcus and his fiancée Chloe were standing near the VIP concierge desk, flanked by a ridiculous mountain of designer luggage. Chloe was the absolute epitome of what my father incorrectly considered a social upgrade. She constantly projected an old money aesthetic with her perfectly blown-out blonde hair and a tennis bracelet that I immediately recognized as cheap cubic zirconia. She had a terrible habit of delivering backhanded compliments wrapped in a sweet, sugary tone. "Oh wow, Maya, you actually came!" Chloe's high-pitched voice echoed across the quiet lobby as she looked me up and down. Her judgmental eyes darted over my unbranded silk blouse and tailored trousers. "It is so brave of you to wear something so homemade to a luxury event. I know budgeting is incredibly hard living in New York. Do not worry, I will personally make sure the photographer angles you out of the main family portraits so you do not feel underdressed or awkward." Marcus stepped forward and crossed his arms, trying to look intimidating. He wore a velvet smoking jacket that I knew for a fact was illegally charged to the company catering account. "Did you bring the cashier's check?" I looked straight at my brother. His arrogant, rigid posture could not hide the slight nervous tremor in his hands. He was desperate. The walls were rapidly closing in on his fake financial empire, and he was terrified Chloe would find out the truth before they officially signed the marriage certificate. "I brought exactly what you deserve, Marcus." He smirked and exchanged a triumphant, knowing look with Chloe. "See, babe, I told you she would cave. She always caves when Dad lays down the law." I let them have their pathetic moment of delusion. Let them fully believe the scapegoat had returned to fund the golden child's expensive fantasy. I adjusted my firm grip on the red legal folder, securely tucked under my arm. The real wedding gift was not a wire transfer for the florist, it was reality, and it was going to hit them harder than they could ever possibly imagine. I walked past them without another word, leaving Marcus and Chloe to their smug delusions. The plush carpet of the lobby silenced my footsteps as I headed straight for the private elevator banks reserved for the penthouse suites. I just wanted a hot shower and an hour of silence before the rehearsal dinner. But of course, in my family, peace was a currency I was never allowed to spend. Before I could even press the call button, a heavy hand grabbed my arm. It was my mother, Brenda. She was wearing a violently pink dress that screamed desperation and smelled overwhelmingly of department store perfume. "Maya, hand over your room keys right now," she demanded. No greeting, just an order. I asked her to excuse me. She crossed her arms and glared. She told me Chloe's parents just arrived from Boston and were booked in a standard room because Marcus maxed out the wedding block limit. She insisted they were high society and could not stay in a standard room. She ordered me to give them my suite and told me to crash on the pull-out sofa in my cousin's room. She said I had always been fine with roughing it and warned me not to embarrass the family in front of the white guests. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. For 33 years, she had treated my comfort as entirely disposable. Growing up, if there was only one good piece of chicken left, it went to Marcus. If there was a financial sacrifice to be made, it came from my college fund. Now she wanted my hotel room. I calmly told her I was not giving up my suite and that I booked it with my own money. She called me a liar. She claimed Marcus said I probably used company points or found a discount code. She demanded the keys again, saying this was about family pride. She said Chloe's parents expected luxury, and the family needed them to know we operate on their level. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I told her they operate on a level of tax fraud and bankruptcy, but she would find that out soon enough. She asked what I was talking about and told me to stop being ridiculous. She said she already told the concierge to transfer their luggage to my floor. I did not argue. I simply turned around and walked back toward the main concierge desk. My mother followed me closely with a victorious smirk playing on her lips. She assumed I was walking over to officially transfer the reservation. The concierge, a sharply dressed man named Philip, smiled warmly as I approached. He welcomed me back and asked how he could assist me. I told Philip there seemed to be a misunderstanding regarding the penthouse block. I explained my mother believed my suite was available for transfer, and I clarified that it was not. My mother slammed her hand on the marble counter. She told Philip she was the mother of the groom, and that her son was paying for half the hotel. She demanded he transfer Suite 801 to the Higgins family immediately, and announced I was moving down to the fourth floor. Philip looked at his computer screen and then back at my mother with polite confusion. He apologized and explained that Suite 801 was a privately owned penthouse. He told her I did not just rent the suite, but my corporate firm held the permanent lease for the entire 8th floor. He stated he could not transfer ownership of a private residence without my legal authorization. My mother's jaw practically hit the marble counter. The victorious smirk vanished instantly and was replaced by sheer confusion and rising panic. She stammered about a corporate firm and a permanent lease. She said I was just a financial advisor and could not possibly own the 8th floor. I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavy black titanium card. I placed it gently on the counter, where the metal clinked softly against the stone. I instructed Philip to revoke all guest access to the 8th floor. I told him to cancel any secondary keycards that might have been issued under the wedding party block. I made it clear that if anyone from the wedding party attempted to access the private elevators without my express verbal permission, I wanted security to escort them back to the lobby. Philip agreed right away and confirmed the elevators were now locked to my biometric access only. I picked up my card and turned to my mother. Her face was flushed dark red. Several hotel staff members and passing guests were now openly staring at the mother of the groom, who had just been publicly denied access to the penthouse level. She hissed at me, asking how dare I do this. She accused me of trying to humiliate my brother on his wedding weekend and called me a selfish, spiteful little girl. I told her I was simply protecting my assets, which was something Marcus should have learned to do before he bankrupted Grandma's company. I left her standing there speechless and fuming. The elevator doors slid shut, blocking out her angry face. For the first time in 10 months, I felt a genuine sense of peace. The countdown had officially begun. 2 hours later, I descended to the hotel ballroom for the rehearsal dinner. The space was obnoxiously decorated with imported white orchids and ice sculptures that I knew Marcus had financed with a high-interest predatory loan. As I entered the room, my father Richard immediately spotted me. He was in the middle of aggressively laughing at a joke made by Chloe's father, a stiff-looking man named Arthur, who wore a forced smile. My father quickly excused himself and marched over to me. His eyes were wide with poorly concealed rage. He growled, keeping his voice low so the other guests would not hear. He said my mother told him what I did in the lobby and accused me of embarrassing the family by refusing to give up my room. I replied that I kept what belongs to me, which is a concept he and Marcus struggle to understand. He snapped and pointed toward a small, poorly lit table near the kitchen doors. He told me I was sitting in the back, far away from the main family. He warned that if I could not act like a supportive sister, I would be treated like a distant guest. He also reminded me about the $40,000 and said I had until midnight to make the wire transfer, or he was calling his lawyer tomorrow morning to rewrite the will. I looked at the table he was pointing to. It was occupied by the wedding photographers, the catering manager, and a few distant cousins who were known for drinking too much. It was the ultimate insult. The golden child sat at the head table beneath a crystal chandelier, while the scapegoat was banished to the shadows next to the swinging kitchen doors. I replied smoothly that the back table was perfectly fine because the view from the back is always the most revealing anyway. I walked over to my assigned exile and sat down. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire room. I watched my family perform their pathetic little play. My father was loudly bragging about the generations of wealth in our family logistics business. My mother was fawning over Chloe's mother complimenting a necklace that was very clearly a cheap imitation piece. And Marcus was holding court, holding a glass of expensive champagne that he was charging directly to the company expense account that I now legally controlled. A cousin named Kiara leaned over to me while chewing loudly on a piece of bread. She said she could not believe they stuck me back here, especially after I basically raised Marcus. She asked if I remembered working 3 jobs in college just so Dad could buy Marcus a brand new luxury car for his high school graduation. I took a slow sip of my water and told Kiara I remembered, but the past is the past, and tonight is all about the future. As dinner progressed, I noticed Marcus growing increasingly anxious. He kept checking his phone and his face was growing pale. The fake smiles he offered Chloe's family were becoming strained. He excused himself from the head table and practically sprinted out the ballroom doors into the hallway. I waited exactly 30 seconds before following him. I found Marcus pacing frantically in the quiet carpeted corridor near the restrooms. He was sweating through his expensive tailored jacket. When he saw me approach, the arrogant mask completely fell away. For a brief second, he looked exactly like the terrified little boy who used to break things and beg me to take the blame so Dad would not yell at him. He grabbed my shoulders with clammy hands and said he needed me to do him a massive favor just this once. I asked him what was wrong and if the florist finally declined his card. He swallowed hard and darted his eyes around to make sure no one was listening. He told me it was worse than the florist. He said he needed a loan for $500,000. He claimed he knew I had the money because he saw my New York apartment online. He begged me to take out a home equity line of credit and swore to God he would pay me back with interest in 6 months. I stared at him. The sheer audacity of his request hung heavy in the quiet hallway. I let out a sharp, dry laugh that echoed against the expensive silk wallpaper. You want me to mortgage my home to fund your fake lifestyle? Are you out of your mind, Marcus? His desperate expression instantly hardened back into familiar arrogance. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me just like he did when we were teenagers. It is not a fake lifestyle, he hissed. I am the chief executive officer of a logistics empire. I just have cash flow issues right now. The economy is terrible, Maya. You would not understand because you just push papers around at some corporate firm. But I am carrying the family legacy. If Chloe finds out about the temporary dip in funds, she will panic and the wedding could be ruined. Do you want to be the reason our family loses this connection? I crossed my arms and looked him dead in the eye. You mean the connection to a family that clearly looks down on us? The connection that requires you to rent luxury cars and put a $200,000 party on a company card you can no longer pay off? I am not giving you a dime, Marcus. You dug this grave yourself. His face twisted into an ugly sneer. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. This is exactly why you are 33 and single, Maya. You are cold. You are calculating. No man wants a woman who only cares about spreadsheets and control. You have always been jealous of me because Dad picked me to run the company. You are pathetic. If you do not wire that money by midnight tonight, I will have hotel security physically throw you out of the venue tomorrow. You will not even get to see me walk down the aisle. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached out, adjusted his crooked velvet lapel and smoothed it down. I leaned in close so he could hear every single syllable clearly. You should really check who owns the debt on your precious company before you start threatening to throw people out of buildings, Marcus. He blinked, clearly confused by the statement. His small brain could not process the magnitude of what I had just said. Before he could ask what I meant, I turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing there sweating in the hallway. I headed toward the grand restrooms near the lobby, wanting a moment to splash cold water on my face. The heavy oak door of the restroom sighed shut behind me, blocking out the faint sound of the rehearsal dinner string quartet. The restroom was empty except for one occupied stall at the very end. As I walked toward the marble sinks, I heard a frantic, hushed voice echoing off the tile. It was Chloe. "Mom, you just have to smile through it, okay?" Chloe whispered fiercely into her phone. "I know his family is tacky. Did you see his mother practically drooling over your necklace? It is embarrassing. But we have to play along for just 48 more hours." I stopped moving. I stood perfectly still near the sinks, listening intently. "Mom, please stop crying," Chloe continued, her voice tight with panic. "We do not have a choice. Dad has 3 tax liens on the Boston house. The bank is threatening to auction it off next month. We are completely bankrupt. But Marcus is loaded. His company pulls in millions. Once we are legally married and I have access to his accounts, I can pay off your tax debt and save the house. Just think of him as a necessary financial bailout. Yes, he is arrogant, and yes, his family is loud, but it is a small price to pay to keep us out of federal court. I have to go before he comes looking for me. I love you too, Mom. Just keep drinking the free champagne." I quietly backed out of the restroom before she could emerge from the stall. I stood in the corridor, letting the absolute absurdity of the situation wash over me. It was a double scam. A broke man desperately marrying a broke woman, with both of them pretending to be incredibly wealthy to trap the other. Chloe thought Marcus was her golden ticket to save her parents from tax fraud. Marcus thought Chloe's fake high society status would legitimize his crumbling empire. They were two financial frauds perfectly matched in their own deceit. I did not return to the rehearsal dinner. The back table could stay empty. I took the private elevator back up to the 8th floor. The moment the doors opened to my secure suite, I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over the Atlanta skyline. The city lights glittered like scattered diamonds in the dark. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lead corporate attorney in New York. He answered on the first ring. "Good evening, Maya. Are the documents ready for execution tomorrow morning?" I smiled, watching the traffic flow far below. "Yes, David. Everything is perfectly in place. I want you to initiate the asset freeze on the logistics company at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Lock every single corporate account. I also want the repossession team on standby near the venue. They should be ready to collect all leased luxury vehicles associated with my brothers. Name the moment the reception begins." "Understood," David replied smoothly. "And regarding the personal estate of your late grandmother?" I took a deep breath. "Proceed as planned. As the sole trustee, I am officially authorizing the foreclosure on my parents' house. They have defaulted on the secret loan Grandma gave them 3 years ago, and I am no longer extending their grace period. Serve the eviction notices tomorrow afternoon. It will be done, Maya. Have a wonderful evening." I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the plush sofa. My family thought I was just the obedient scapegoat who ran away to New York because I could not handle being second best. They had absolutely no idea that Grandma Theodore had seen right through my father's reckless spending and my brother's sheer incompetence. Before she passed away, she secretly transferred her entire estate and the controlling trust into my name. She knew I was the only one cold and calculating enough to protect the legacy she built. She tasked me with cleaning up their mess. And for 10 months, I had done exactly that. My crisis management firm had quietly purchased all of my brother's defaulted corporate debt from the banks for pennies on the dollar. I was not just his sister anymore. I was his primary creditor. I owned his company. I owned his cars. And as of tomorrow morning, I owned my parents' house. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and walked into the master bedroom. I looked at the custom black silk gown hanging beautifully in the closet. Tomorrow was going to be an absolute bloodbath. And for the first time in my 33 years of life, I was going to enjoy every single second of it. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning, turned off the lights, and went to sleep with a peaceful smile on my face. My alarm buzzed at exactly 6 in the morning. I woke up feeling more refreshed than I had in 10 months. The soft morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse suite, casting long shadows across the pristine white carpet. Today was the day everything would finally collapse. I ordered a light breakfast of fresh fruit and a black coffee from room service, and took a long hot shower, letting the steam clear my mind. I was just finishing my makeup, carefully applying a deep red lipstick, when there was a frantic pounding on my suite door. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, aggressive hammering of someone who felt entitled to my space and my attention. I opened the heavy oak door to find my mother Brenda standing there, gripping a mangled piece of cheap lavender chiffon. Her face was pale, and her eyes were darting around nervously. Behind her stood Chloe, wearing a plush white hotel robe with the word bride embroidered in heavy gold thread on the back. Chloe was holding a heavy-duty garment steamer and sporting a perfectly practiced look of fake guilt. Her eyes were wide but completely devoid of any real remorse. Chloe whined, pitching her voice an octave higher than usual to sound like a distressed victim. She told me she was so incredibly sorry. She claimed she was trying to help steam my bridesmaid dress because it looked so wrinkled in the garment bag, but the steamer caught the delicate fabric and completely shredded the bodice. She insisted she really did not know how it happened and swore it was a total accident. I looked down at the ruined dress my mother was practically shoving into my chest. It was not just caught in a steamer. The thin fabric was deliberately slashed in multiple places. It looked like someone had taken a pair of sharp fabric scissors to it. It was a cheap, transparent sabotage designed to force me out of the wedding photos, so Chloe would not have to share the spotlight with a sister-in-law she secretly despised. I looked at Chloe. Her fake pout was betraying a tiny, triumphant smirk at the corners of her mouth. She wanted me humiliated or entirely absent. My mother shoved the ruined dress into my hands. She snapped that this was an absolute disaster, as if I was the one who destroyed it. She ordered me to run down to the budget mall 3 miles from here and find something off the rack in the exact same shade of lavender. She reminded me I had exactly 2 hours before the photographer arrived for the bridal party portraits. She told me not to ruin this aesthetic for my brother, and commanded me to go right now and use my own credit card, because Marcus was busy. I calmly dropped the shredded lavender rags into the nearest trash can beside the door. I replied smoothly, keeping my voice perfectly even, that I was not running to a budget mall. I also stated I was definitely not wearing lavender. My mother gasped, stepping fully into my suite uninvited. She asked what I was talking about and insisted I had to wear a dress. She demanded to know what I was going to do and asked if I planned to just stand there and embarrass them in my street clothes in front of the Boston elite. I walked over to the heavy closet and unzipped my personal leather garment bag. I pulled out a stunning, custom-tailored black silk gown. It was a quiet luxury masterpiece, with no flashy logos, just flawless stitching and a sharp, elegant silhouette that draped perfectly over my frame. I held it up so the morning light caught the dark silk and announced I was wearing this. Chloe's fake innocent act dropped instantly. Her eyes widened in genuine horror. She practically shrieked, dropping the steamer onto the floor and telling me I could not wear black to her wedding. She argued that black is for funerals and said it was bad luck and completely disrespectful to the bride. She accused me of trying to ruin her perfect day. I looked her dead in the eye and offered a cold, terrifying smile. I told Chloe I was attending a funeral. I said it was the death of this family's financial delusions. Before Chloe could even process what I meant, heavy footsteps echoed loudly in the hallway. My father, Richard, stormed into the room, pushing past my mother. His face was thunderous and flushed a deep, angry red. He had clearly been summoned by a frantic text message from his future daughter-in-law. He bellowed, pointing a thick, heavy finger directly at my face, asking what the hell was going on. He yelled that Chloe was in tears on her wedding morning because I was refusing to cooperate. I calmly told my father I was refusing to wear a dress that his future daughter-in-law deliberately destroyed with a pair of scissors. I held up the black silk gown again and stated I was wearing this or I was not standing in the bridal party at all. My father stepped so close I could smell the bitter, stale coffee on his breath. He spat his words with his voice trembling from years of built-up rage. He accused me of always trying to ruin things for Marcus. He said I was always jealous of his success and always bitter that I had to move away. He mocked me, saying if I wanted to wear black and act like a grieving widow at my brother's celebration, then fine. He officially kicked me out of the bridal party and declared I was not standing up there with them today. My mother nodded vigorously in agreement, her pink dress rustling loudly. She said Richard was absolutely right and that I could not be trusted to act like a normal, supportive sister. My father was not finished asserting his fake authority. He added that since I wanted to act like an outsider, I was going to sit exactly like one. He ordered me not to sit in the front row with the family. He commanded me to sit at the very back of the hall with the catering staff. He threatened that if I made a single scene, he would call his lawyer before the reception even began and write me out of the family trust permanently. He demanded to know if I understood him and told me I was nothing but a distant guest now. They both stared at me expecting tears. They expected me to beg for forgiveness or apologize to Chloe to reclaim my spot in the golden circle of this toxic family. Instead, I carefully laid my black silk gown on the freshly made bed. I looked at my father and nodded slowly. I said, "Okay, Dad," and told him if he wanted me to sit with the catering staff, I would sit with the catering staff. My immediate calm compliance threw him off. He blinked rapidly, his anger momentarily stalling because he had no argument to fight against. He finally muttered good, while adjusting his expensive tie uncomfortably. He told me to see that I do. He turned and marched out of the room with my mother and Chloe trailing behind him, like obedient, nervous shadows. Chloe threw one last smug look over her shoulder, believing she had secured the ultimate victory of the morning. I locked the door behind them and laughed out loud. It was a genuine rich laugh that bubbled up from my chest. My father thought he was punishing me by banishing me to the catering section. What he did not know was that my crisis management firm owned the massive parent company that supplied the luxury catering vendor for this exact hotel venue. I was not being banished to sit with the help. I was walking directly into my own command center. 2 hours later, I descended to the grand ballroom, wearing my black silk gown. The dress flowed around me like dark water, making absolutely no sound. I bypassed the beautiful, expensive floral arches and the front rows of velvet chairs reserved for the immediate family. I walked straight to the back of the massive room where the heavy double doors led to the catering staging area. The head event manager, a sharp professional woman named Sarah, looked up from her digital clipboard as I approached. Sarah greeted me respectfully as Ms. Higgins and immediately lowered her voice so the nearby guests would not hear. She mentioned they were not expecting me to physically inspect the venue operations today. I smiled warmly at her and said I was just here to observe. I added that I did need her to make a slight adjustment to the billing protocols for the reception this afternoon. Sarah agreed without hesitation and asked what I needed. I looked out at the opulent room. The giant ice sculptures were already melting slightly under the warm, heavy lights. The open bar was stocked with extremely expensive top-shelf liquor that Marcus had aggressively demanded. I softly instructed Sarah to freeze the open bar tab exactly 15 minutes into the reception. I told her not to accept any further corporate credit cards from Marcus. I made it clear that when the cards inevitably decline, she was to shut down the bar immediately and clearly inform the guests that the groom had insufficient funds to cover the drinks. Sarah nodded, her face perfectly professional and unfazed. She said she understood completely and promised to relay the order to the lead bartender right away. I took my seat at a small high-top table near the kitchen doors, just as the orchestral string quartet began to play the traditional bridal march. I watched from the shadows as my family paraded down the white aisle. My father puffed out his chest, walking as if he owned the entire world and everyone in it. Marcus stood at the altar, sweating slightly in his unpaid velvet jacket, but grinning like a triumphant king. Chloe floated down the aisle, looking like the ultimate picture of wealthy innocence. They stood facing each other and began reciting their custom vows. Marcus spoke loudly into the microphone, promising to provide for Chloe in richer or poorer. He bragged about his massive success and promised her a life of endless luxury and international travel. Chloe responded with equally fake promises about building a wealthy corporate empire together and maintaining their high society status in Boston. It was the most ridiculous and nauseating display of mutual fraud I had ever witnessed in my entire career. As the officiant proudly pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted into loud cheers. My parents stood up and clapped aggressively, wiping fake tears from their eyes. I did not clap. I simply picked up my phone, opened my secure email server, and found the drafted message addressed to the bank repossession agency. They were already waiting on standby 3 blocks away from the hotel. I looked at my brother kissing his new wife under a dramatic cascade of falling white rose petals. They were at the absolute peak of their fake mountain. It was a very long way to fall. I pressed send. The email went through instantly. The repossession teams were now officially inbound to collect the entire fleet of luxury cars parked out front. The financial guillotine had just been released. I stood up, smoothed the dark silk of my dress, and prepared to walk into the reception. The real party was finally about to begin. I walked through the heavy double doors into the grand reception hall. The room was an absolute shrine to financial irresponsibility. Towering centerpieces of imported white orchids dominated every single table. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, expensive glow over the massive ice sculptures flanking the entrance. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated smoothly, carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and top-shelf champagne. Chloe's Boston relatives were already making themselves comfortable at the prime VIP tables, looking down their noses at my family members, who were loudly marveling at the sheer excessive luxury of it all. I took my assigned seat at the very back of the room near the kitchen doors and calmly waited. Exactly 15 minutes into the reception, the atmosphere shifted. The band played a smooth jazz number as Marcus and Chloe made their grand entrance onto the dance floor. The crowd erupted into loud cheers. Marcus grabbed the microphone from the bandleader. He stood in the center of the room with his chest puffed out, soaking in the applause. He spent a solid 10 minutes delivering a deeply arrogant speech about how he was a self-made millionaire. He bragged about taking the family logistics empire to new international heights and promised Chloe a lifetime of endless luxury. Then his eyes scanned the room and locked onto me, sitting in the shadows. A cruel, vindictive smile spread across his face. "I want to take a special moment to thank my sister Maya for showing up today," Marcus announced, his voice echoing loudly through the massive speakers. "Even though she could not afford to contribute financially to this beautiful celebration, we still believe in including family. But Dad and I had a very long talk this morning. To ensure the future of this incredible company, we have officially agreed that the entire family legacy and the estate will pass solely to me and my beautiful new wife, Chloe. We are building a modern dynasty." A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by awkward, scattered applause from Chloe's side of the family. My mother beamed with pride. My father nodded sternly, crossing his arms in agreement. They thought they had finally put the ultimate scapegoat in her place. They thought public humiliation would break me. I stood up from my small table. The room fell completely dead silent. I did not rush, and I certainly did not cry. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a corporate executioner. My custom black silk gown swept silently across the pristine marble floor. Every single eye in the ballroom tracked my movement. I walked straight past the cheap seats, past the VIP section, and directly up to the head table. I looked at the bandleader and gave a sharp, cutting motion with my hand. The music abruptly stopped. I picked up the spare microphone resting near the extravagant 5-tier wedding cake. My voice was chillingly calm and projected perfectly through the quiet room. "Since we are making public financial declarations, Marcus, I think your new in-laws should know exactly what they just married into." I dropped the heavy red legal folder onto the white tablecloth right in front of him. The loud slap of the thick documents made Chloe jump in her seat. "You are not a chief executive officer, Marcus," I said, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "You are a massive liability, Your logistics company defaulted on its heavy loans 6 months ago. My crisis management firm quietly bought your defaulted debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I own 80% of your equity. You have been funding this fake lifestyle with my money, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially fired for corporate embezzlement. The color instantly drained from my brother's face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. My father leaped out of his chair, knocking over his expensive crystal water glass. "That is a lie," my father screamed, his face turning purple with rage. "That is illegal, Maya. You cannot steal a family business." I turned my cold gaze to my father. "It is perfectly legal, Dad. I brought the forensic accountants into the corporate office yesterday. They have already seized his servers and documented every single fraudulent charge, including the $200,000 he stole to pay for this exact party." Chloe suddenly shrieked, breaking the stunned silence. She slammed her hands on the table, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the cloth. "You are ruining my high society wedding," she cried out, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "Security needs to remove her right now." I turned to Chloe and offered her a slow, pitying smile. "High society, Chloe. Please stop embarrassing yourself. Your parents have 3 federal tax liens filed against them in Boston, and your childhood home is going to public auction next month." Chloe's jaw dropped. Her parents sitting at the front table suddenly froze, looking completely terrified. The murmurs in the room escalated into loud, shocked whispers. "I heard you crying in the restroom last night, Chloe." I continued, my voice steady and ruthless. "You married a broke, unemployed man who just lost his company, hoping he would pay off your parents' massive tax debt. Congratulations to the happy couple of scammers. You are both entirely bankrupt and you absolutely deserve each other." At that exact moment, the head catering manager, Sarah, walked briskly up to the head table. She did not look at Marcus. She looked directly at me and nodded respectfully. "The bar just declined all 4 of his corporate credit cards," Sarah announced loudly enough for the front rows to hear. "We are shutting down the alcohol service immediately." The room erupted into total chaos. Guests began whispering frantically, pulling out their phones to text the gossip. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table, hyperventilating. Chloe was violently shoving him, demanding to know if I was telling the truth. My father stepped forward. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He was shaking with an uncontrollable fury. "You are a monster!" he roared, his voice echoing over the rising panic in the ballroom. "You are completely dead to me, Maya. I am calling my lawyer right now. I am disinheriting you from my house and stripping you of everything." I looked at my father with absolute ice in my veins. The moment I had been waiting 10 months for had finally arrived. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "You cannot disinherit me from a house you do not own, Dad. I am the sole trustee of Grandma's estate. The deed has been entirely in my name for 10 months, and I authorized the foreclosure of your house this morning. You have exactly 30 days to pack your things and get off my property." I dropped the microphone onto the table. The sharp feedback echoed through the massive speakers, making everyone wince. I turned my back on the screaming, arguing mess of a family and began walking down the center aisle toward the exit. Through the large glass windows at the front of the venue, I could already see the flashing yellow lights of the tow trucks backing up to repossess my brother's rented luxury cars. The financial guillotine had dropped perfectly, and I was finally free. I looked at my brother standing there in his unpaid velvet jacket, sweating under the hallway lights. He had just asked me to mortgage my home in New York to hand him $500,000. For a moment, I did not say anything. I just let the sheer absolute audacity of his request hang heavily in the quiet air between us. The faint sound of clinking glasses and laughter drifted through the heavy oak doors of the rehearsal dinner. But out here in the corridor, the silence was suffocating. I let out a short, sharp laugh. "You want me to take out a $500,000 loan against my own apartment to fund your fake lifestyle? Are you completely out of your mind, Marcus?" The desperate, pleading look in his eyes vanished in an instant. The vulnerability he had shown just seconds ago evaporated and was quickly replaced by the familiar, ugly arrogance I had grown up with. He took a step closer to me, attempting to use his physical height to intimidate me, just like he did when we were teenagers. It is not a fake lifestyle, Maya, he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. I am the chief executive officer of a logistics empire. We are a legacy family. I just have some temporary cash flow issues right now because the economy is terrible. You would not understand the pressure I am under because you just push papers around at some corporate firm in New York. You have no idea what it takes to run a real business. I crossed my arms and held my ground, refusing to step back. You mean you have no idea what it takes? Grandpa Theodore built that company from nothing. He worked 18-hour days to secure those contracts, and you took his legacy and turned it into your personal piggy bank. Do you think I am blind, Marcus? I see the designer clothes. I see the luxury car leases. You are burning through cash. You do not have to impress a woman who looks down on this family. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He pointed a shaking finger right at my face. Chloe does not look down on us. She comes from old money. She is bringing real class to this family. Something you know absolutely nothing about. If she finds out about this temporary dip in funds, she will panic, and the wedding could be ruined. Do you want to be the reason our family loses this massive social connection? Do you want to be the one who destroys my happiness? I stared at him, feeling nothing but absolute pity. The connection you are so desperate to keep requires you to rent luxury cars and put a $200,000 party on a corporate card you can no longer pay off. I am not giving you a single dime, Marcus. I am not co-signing a loan. I am not saving you. You dug this grave completely by yourself, and now you get to lie in it. When I said the word no, his entire demeanor turned vicious. He bared his teeth in a cruel sneer. This right here is exactly why you are 33 years old and completely alone, Maya. You are cold, you are calculating, and you are bitter. No man is ever going to want a woman who only cares about spreadsheets and control. You have always been jealous of me. You have been jealous since the day Dad picked me to run the company instead of you. You could not handle being second best, so you ran away to New York to pretend you are important. His words were meant to hurt me, but they just bounced off. I knew my worth, and I knew my bank account balance. I did not need a man to validate my existence, and I certainly did not need my father's failing logistics company to prove I was successful. You are pathetic, Maya, he continued, his voice rising in anger. You came all the way down here just to ruin my weekend because you are miserable. Well, I am not going to let you do it. Dad already told you the rules. If you do not wire that $40,000 for the florist by midnight tonight, I am going to have hotel security physically throw you out of this venue tomorrow morning. You will be escorted off the property like a common trespasser. You will not even get to see me walk down the aisle, and Dad will make sure you are permanently written out of the family trust. You will get absolutely nothing. He stood there breathing heavily, believing he had just delivered the ultimate crushing blow. He expected me to crumble. He expected the threat of public humiliation and the loss of my inheritance to force me into submission. That was how this family had always operated. Fear and financial threats were their only weapons. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of emotion. I simply reached out and grabbed the lapel of his velvet jacket. I adjusted his crooked tie, smoothing the expensive fabric down against his chest. I leaned in close so he could hear every single syllable clearly over the soft background music playing in the distance. You should really check who owns the debt on your precious company before you start threatening to throw people out of buildings, Marcus. I whispered the words with a chilling calmness. He blinked rapidly, clearly confused by the statement. His brain was so clouded by panic and arrogance that he could not process the magnitude of what I had just said. He furrowed his brow, opening his mouth to ask what I meant. But I did not give him the chance to speak. I let go of his tie, turned on my heel, and walked away. I left him standing there, sweating in the hallway, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just threatened the woman who held his entire financial future in the palm of her hand. I left Marcus standing alone in the softly lit corridor. The heavy silence of the hallway was a stark contrast to the pounding rhythm of his panicked breathing. I did not look back to see his reaction. I knew exactly what his face looked like. It was the face of a man who suddenly realized he was swimming in deep water with heavy weights tied to his ankles. I walked briskly toward the grand lobby restrooms, needing a moment away from the suffocating arrogance of my family and the endless parade of fake smiles. The heavy mahogany door of the ladies' lounge clicked softly shut behind me, instantly muting the distant sounds of clinking crystal and forced laughter from the rehearsal dinner. The restroom was a masterpiece of excessive luxury. Floor-to-ceiling marble covered the walls, and thick gold fixtures gleamed under the warm ambient lighting. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, reflecting beautifully off the spotless mirrors. The air smelled strongly of expensive white lilies and citrus air freshener. At first glance, the opulent room appeared completely empty. I walked slowly toward the row of ornate sinks, intending to splash some cold water on my wrists to calm my racing mind. But as I reached for the gold faucet, I heard a sharp, frantic whisper echoing from the very last enclosed stall. It was Chloe. Her voice lacked the sweet, sugary polish she had been aggressively projecting all evening. Instead, she sounded strained, desperate, and on the verge of tears. "Mom, you just have to smile through it, okay?" Chloe whispered fiercely into her phone. "I know his family is completely tacky. Did you see his mother practically drooling over your necklace during the appetizer course? It is so embarrassing. They are incredibly loud and they have absolutely no class whatsoever. But we have to play along for just 48 more hours. I promise you it will be worth it." I stopped moving completely. I stood perfectly still near the marble sinks, barely daring to breathe. I did not want the motion sensor lights or the automatic faucet to trigger and give away my presence. I listened intently as the quiet echo of her conversation filled the room. "Mom, please stop crying." Chloe continued, her voice rising in pitch as her panic clearly escalated. "We do not have a choice here. You and Dad have 3 federal tax liens on the Boston house. The bank has already issued the final notice, and they are threatening to auction the property off next month. We are completely bankrupt. We have 0 cash left." But Marcus is loaded. His father literally just spent 10 minutes at the dinner table bragging about how their logistics company pulls in millions of dollars in profit every single year. I leaned slightly against the cold marble counter. The sheer absolute absurdity of the situation was beginning to wash over me in waves. "Once we are legally married and the ink is dry on the certificate, I will have direct access to his corporate accounts," Chloe explained desperately to her mother. "I can quietly wire the funds to pay off your tax debt and save the family house. Nobody even has to know. Just think of Marcus as a necessary financial bailout for us. Yes, he is deeply arrogant, and yes, his family is difficult to tolerate, but it is a very small price to pay to keep our family out of federal bankruptcy court. I have to go before he comes looking for me. I love you too, Mom. Just go back out there and keep drinking the free champagne." I heard the quiet beep of the phone call ending. I quickly and silently backed away from the sinks before she could unlatch the stall door. I slipped out the heavy mahogany door and stepped back into the carpeted corridor. I leaned against the hallway wall and covered my mouth to stop myself from laughing out loud. The puzzle was finally complete. The picture it formed was the most poetic and hilarious disaster I had ever witnessed in my entire career as a financial crisis manager. It was a spectacular double scam. My brother was a broke, unemployed man, drowning in $2 million of corporate debt. He was desperately marrying Chloe because he firmly believed her old money Boston family would legitimize his crumbling empire and eventually bail him out when the truth came to light. He thought she was his golden ticket to high society. Meanwhile, Chloe was a broke, desperate woman whose family was weeks away from losing their home to a federal tax auction. She was marrying Marcus because she firmly believed his fake logistics empire would provide the endless cash flow she needed to save her parents from total financial ruin. She thought he was her wealthy savior. They were 2 financial frauds, perfectly matched in their own deceit. Neither of them had a single dime to their name. They were both aggressively spending money that did not actually exist to impress people who did not actually care. They were building a massive, delicate house of cards on a foundation of absolute lies. My father had spent my entire childhood worshiping the idea of high society. He constantly degraded me for not caring about designer labels or exclusive country club memberships. He pushed Marcus to date women like Chloe because he thought proximity to whiteness and old money would somehow elevate our family standing in the world. He was so blinded by his own superficial desires that he never bothered to run a simple financial background check on his future daughter-in-law. If he had, he would have easily discovered the public tax records and the impending foreclosure notices attached to her family name. He wanted a shiny trophy for his golden child, and he ended up buying a defective liability. And Chloe was just as guilty. She looked down on my family with such obvious disdain. Her racist microaggressions about my clothing and her constant eye rolling at my mother's loud behavior were entirely rooted in a false sense of superiority. She felt entitled to steal my brother's money because she genuinely believed her presence in his life was a prize he should gladly pay for. She was willing to endure what she considered a tacky family just to secure her own financial survival. I realized in that moment that my revenge did not require any elaborate manipulation. I did not need to scream or fight or argue with my parents ever again. All I had to do was stand back and let the truth do the heavy lifting. The truth was going to hit them harder than any insult or physical blow ever could. I decided I was not going to return to the rehearsal dinner. My assigned seat at the back table next to the swinging kitchen doors could stay empty for the rest of the night. I walked past the entrance to the grand ballroom where I could hear my father still loudly bragging to Chloe's terrified father about generational wealth. I stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the 8th floor. The trap was set and both of the mice had eagerly run right into it. The elevator doors chimed softly as I arrived at the penthouse level. I walked down the silent carpeted hallway and swiped my heavy titanium keycard against the lock of Suite 801. The heavy door clicked open, revealing the massive living space bathed in the soft ambient glow of the city lights pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I locked the door behind me, securing my sanctuary away from the toxic circus playing out downstairs. The air up here was cool and quiet, completely untouched by the desperate lies echoing through the hotel ballroom. I walked directly to the mahogany desk sitting in the corner of the room. I set my clutch down and opened my secure leather briefcase. Inside, resting perfectly flat, was the thick red legal folder I had brought with me from New York. I poured myself a small glass of sparkling water from the minibar and sat down in the heavy leather executive chair. I opened my encrypted laptop and checked the time. It was approaching midnight, but in my line of work, the most important moves are always made in the dark. I initiated a secure encrypted video conference call. Two faces immediately popped onto the high-resolution screen. One was David, my lead corporate acquisitions attorney in Manhattan. The other was Eleanor, the senior estate lawyer based in Atlanta, who had been my grandmother's most trusted confidant for over 30 years. "Good evening, Maya." David said, his voice crisp and completely professional. Eleanor offered a warm, proud smile from her home office. "Are we ready to proceed, my dear?" she asked, adjusting her reading glasses. I took a slow sip of my water and nodded. "We are fully cleared for tomorrow morning," I replied. "I just discovered a new piece of information that makes our timeline even more critical. Let us finalize the execution protocol." As David pulled up the extensive digital spreadsheets, I allowed myself a brief moment to reflect on the reality of the past 10 months. When I packed up my entire life in Atlanta and relocated to New York, my family assumed I was simply running away. They firmly believed I was bitter about my father officially handing the family logistics company over to Marcus. They even threw a massive, loud celebration dinner the week before I left, spending the entire evening loudly praising my brother's supposed natural business genius. They never bothered to ask why I was actually leaving. If they had paid any attention to me at all, they would have learned about the secret closed-door meetings I had been having with Eleanor. 2 weeks before she passed away, Grandma Theodore summoned me to her hospital room. I still remember the sterile smell of the room and the feeling of her weathered, calloused hands gripping mine with surprising strength. She looked me dead in the eye and told me she knew exactly what my father and brother were. She knew my father was completely blinded by a desperate, pathetic need for high society validation. She also knew Marcus was arrogant, reckless, and completely incompetent. She told me they would burn her legacy to the ground just to keep themselves warm for a single night. She refused to let them destroy the generational wealth she and my grandfather had sacrificed their entire lives to build. So she quietly bypassed them completely. She placed her entire estate, including the massive property portfolio, into a highly secure blind trust, and legally appointed me as the sole trustee. I spent my first 3 months in New York meticulously organizing her assets far away from my father's greedy reaching hands. But the estate trust was only half of the equation. While I was securing Grandma's legacy, my professional corporate team in New York was closely monitoring the family logistics company. Marcus took over the chief executive role and immediately began bleeding the operating accounts dry. He took out massive high-interest commercial loans to fund his ridiculous luxury car leases, custom velvet wardrobes, and useless extravagant marketing campaigns featuring his own face. When the company inevitably defaulted on the debt, the commercial bank panicked. That was exactly when my crisis management firm stepped in. Under the cover of a quiet corporate subsidiary, we aggressively purchased the defaulted debt directly from the bank for 20 cents on the dollar. Marcus thought the bank was just giving him an extended grace period due to the bad economy. He had absolutely no idea that his own sister was now his senior secured creditor. I owned 80% of the equity. I owned the warehouse buildings. I owned the operating licenses. I even owned the very company credit card he was currently swiping downstairs at the hotel bar to pay for a $200,000 wedding reception. David shared his screen displaying the final legal injunctions. The asset freeze on the logistics company will automatically trigger at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. David confirmed, tapping his pen against his desk. Every single corporate bank account under your brother's name will be instantly locked by the central banking authority. He will have zero access to any operational funds. The corporate credit cards will be permanently declined everywhere. I nodded, approving the schedule. And the repossession orders, I asked. Eleanor chimed in, bringing up a separate file. The repossession agency is fully briefed and on retainer, Maya. They have the license plates, the vehicle identification numbers, and the GPS tracking data for your brother's rented Ferrari and the 3 luxury sport utility vehicles he leased for his groomsmen. They will be staged 2 blocks away from the wedding venue tomorrow afternoon, waiting for your direct signal to move in. Excellent, I said, leaning back in my chair. Now regarding the residential property. Eleanor brought up a heavy legal document covered in official red notary stamps. Your parents' house, she stated, her tone turning very serious. When your father secretly begged your grandmother for a massive personal loan 3 years ago to cover his own terrible real estate investments, she made him put his house up as collateral. He has not made a single payment in 14 months, assuming the debt would just vanish when she passed. As the sole trustee of the estate, you have the absolute legal authority to collect on that defaulted loan. I authorize the immediate foreclosure. I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any hesitation. Process the paperwork first thing in the morning. Serve the official eviction notices to them tomorrow afternoon while they are sitting at the reception. They have lived rent-free in a house of lies for long enough. David and Eleanor both nodded in complete agreement. The legal papers were finalized, every signature was authenticated, every timeline was synced, and every trap was perfectly primed. We concluded the meeting and I closed my laptop. The screen faded to black, reflecting my calm, focused expression in the dark glass. I stood up from the desk and walked into the master bedroom. I looked at the custom-tailored black silk gown hanging carefully in the heavy wooden closet. It was beautiful, sharp, and completely unforgiving. Just like the absolute truth I was about to deliver. My family had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. They demanded my obedience while constantly disrespecting my presence. They thought they could use my silence to fund their fake wealthy reality. But tomorrow was execution day. Tomorrow, the golden child and his enablers were going to learn that the scapegoat they constantly underestimated was actually the one holding the keys to their entire kingdom. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning, laid down on the plush mattress, and fell into a deep, completely dreamless sleep. The alarm buzzed softly at exactly 6 in the morning. I opened my eyes and stared at the high ceiling of the penthouse suite. I felt incredibly rested. The soft morning light was just beginning to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm golden glow over the pristine white carpets. Today was the day everything was going to change. I ordered a light breakfast of fresh fruit and a strong black coffee from room service. I took a long hot shower, letting the steam clear my mind and wash away the lingering toxicity of last night's rehearsal dinner. I was sitting at the vanity mirror carefully applying a deep red lipstick when a sudden violent pounding echoed through the suite. It was not the polite measured knock of hotel staff. It was a frantic entitled hammering that I instantly recognized. I tightened the belt of my silk robe and walked slowly toward the entryway. When I swung the heavy oak door open, I was greeted by a scene of perfectly orchestrated chaos. My mother Brenda stood there with her arms crossed, looking deeply annoyed. Right beside her was Chloe. Chloe was wearing a fluffy white hotel robe with the word bride heavily embroidered in sparkling gold thread across the chest. Her blonde hair was pinned up in curlers, and she smelled overwhelmingly of sweet floral perfume and nervous sweat. In her shaking hands, Chloe was clutching a mangled pile of cheap lavender chiffon. It was supposed to be my bridesmaid dress. Oh my God, Maya, I am so incredibly sorry, Chloe whined, pitching her voice an octave higher to sound like a helpless victim. Her fake pout was so exaggerated it belonged in a terrible daytime soap opera. She held out the shredded fabric as if it were a tragic accident. I was just trying to help steam out some of the wrinkles from your dress, because it looked so messy in the garment bag. But the heavy-duty hotel steamer just went completely crazy. It caught the delicate fabric and just shredded the entire bodice. I really do not know how it happened. I swear it was a complete accident. I did not say a single word. I simply reached out and took the ruined dress from her hands. I held the fabric up to the morning light pouring in from the hallway. The damage was not a snag or a tear from a malfunctioning steamer. The cuts were incredibly precise and perfectly straight. Someone had clearly taken a pair of sharp, heavy-duty fabric scissors and deliberately slashed the bodice into ribbons. It was a cheap, transparent act of sabotage. Chloe wanted me out of the bridal party photos because she could not stand sharing the spotlight with a sister-in-law she secretly despised. She thought if my dress was destroyed, I would be forced to back out completely or wear something hideous. My mother stepped forward, completely ignoring the obvious scissor marks. "This is an absolute disaster, Maya," she snapped, as if I was the one who had destroyed the garment. "You are stressing the bride out on her wedding morning. We do not have time for this drama. The photographer is going to be here in less than 2 hours for the bridal party portraits. You need to fix this right now." I looked at my mother calmly, taking in her panicked expression. "And how exactly would you like me to fix a dress that has been sliced into ribbons?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. My mother let out a loud, exasperated sigh. "There is a budget outlet mall about 3 miles down the highway. You need to call a taxi right now and run down there immediately. Find something off the rack in the exact same shade of lavender. Do not ruin the aesthetic of this wedding because of a silly accident. And you need to use your own credit card to pay for it because Marcus is completely stressed out, and I am not asking him for another dime today. Go get dressed and hurry up." They both stared at me. They expected me to panic. They expected me to scramble, rush out the door, and frantically search through clearance racks just to maintain my miserable position in this toxic family. It was the exact same dynamic I had endured my entire childhood. I was always expected to clean up the messes created by the golden child and his chosen circle while swallowing my own pride. Chloe was practically vibrating with smug satisfaction behind my mother waiting for me to surrender. I calmly dropped the shredded lavender rags directly into the trash can beside the door. I am not running to a budget mall, I replied smoothly. And I am definitely not wearing lavender today. My mother gasped, stepping fully into my suite uninvited. What are you talking about? She demanded. You have to wear a dress. What are you going to do? Are you planning to just stand there and embarrass your brother in your street clothes in front of the Boston elite? I turned my back on them and walked unhurriedly toward the heavy wooden closet at the back of the room. I reached inside and unzipped my personal black leather garment bag. I pulled out a stunning custom-tailored black silk gown. It was a masterpiece of quiet luxury, with no flashy logos or cheap embellishments. It featured flawless stitching, a sharp, elegant silhouette, and heavy fabric that draped perfectly like dark water. I held it up so the bright morning light caught the deep black silk. I am wearing this, I announced, holding the dress perfectly still. Chloe's fake innocent act dropped instantly. Her eyes widened in genuine horror as she stared at the gown. She practically shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the dress. You cannot wear black to my wedding, she yelled, her voice losing all its sugary sweetness. Black is for funerals. It is terrible luck, and it is completely disrespectful to me as the bride. You are doing this on purpose to ruin my perfect day. I looked her dead in the eye and offered a cold, terrifying smile. I am attending a funeral, Chloe, I said softly but firmly. The death of this family's financial delusions. Before Chloe could even process the weight of my words, the heavy wooden door to my suite was violently pushed open. The hinges groaned loudly in protest. Heavy, aggressive footsteps stomped onto the pristine white carpet. It was my father, Richard. His face was flushed a deep, dangerous shade of crimson, and the thick veins in his neck were visibly bulging against his stiff white collar. He had clearly been summoned by a frantic text message from Chloe or my mother before they even knocked on my door. He smelled strongly of stale coffee and expensive musky cologne, a scent that always preceded his worst temper tantrums. Chloe immediately pivoted into her victim role. The moment my father entered the room, she let out a loud, dramatic sob and buried her face in her hands. She held up the shredded lavender chiffon like a casualty of war. Richard, look what she did, Chloe cried, her voice muffled by her manicured fingers. She is refusing to wear the dress, and now she says she is wearing black to ruin my wedding photos. She hates me, Richard. She has hated me since the day Marcus introduced us. My father did not ask for my side of the story. He never did. He marched straight toward me, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the carpet. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my face. What the hell is wrong with you, Maya? He bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the penthouse. This is the most important day of your brother's entire life, and you are up here throwing a jealous, spiteful tantrum. You are deliberately stressing out the bride on her wedding morning. I stood my ground, holding the custom black silk gown over my arm. I looked at the mangled purple fabric still clutched in Chloe's hands. Dad, the dress was cut with fabric scissors, I said calmly, keeping my voice perfectly level. A hotel steamer does not slice straight, clean lines through chiffon. She destroyed the dress herself because she does not want me in the bridal party. My father slammed his hand down on the vanity table, rattling the expensive glass perfume bottles. I do not care about the damn dress, he roared. I care about your relentless, terrible attitude. You have always been jealous of Marcus. You have been bitter since you were a little girl because you knew he was destined to take over the family legacy while you just ran away to New York. You could never stand seeing him succeed, and now you are trying to sabotage his marriage to a woman who actually brings real class to this family. My mother. Brenda nodded vigorously from the corner of the room, her brightly colored dress rustling loudly. She is completely out of control, Richard, my mother chimed in. I told her to just go buy a replacement dress, and she refused. She thinks she is better than all of us just because she lives in Manhattan. My father took another step closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. His eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered rage. "Well, I am putting an end to this right now," he spat. "You are officially out of the bridal party, Maya. You are not standing up there next to my son. You do not deserve to share the spotlight with this family today." Chloe lowered her hands from her face just enough to shoot me a venomous, triumphant glare. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. But my father was not finished asserting his fake authority. He wanted to make sure I was properly humiliated. "Since you want to act like an outsider, you are going to sit exactly like one," he commanded, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. "You are not sitting in the front row with the parents. You are not sitting at the VIP tables. You are going to go downstairs, and you are going to sit in the very back of the hall with the catering staff. Maybe spending the evening with the hired help will finally teach you your place in this world." He thought it was the ultimate insult. In his desperate class-obsessed mind, sitting with the working staff was a fate worse than death. He wanted me to feel small, invisible, and entirely worthless while he paraded his fake wealth in front of the Boston elite. "And let me make one thing crystal clear to you, Maya," my father continued, lowering his voice to a threatening growl. "If you make a single scene today, if you talk back to Chloe or embarrass Marcus in front of his new in-laws, I will call my estate lawyer before the reception even begins. I will have you permanently removed from the family will. I will strip you of your inheritance, and you will get absolutely nothing from the legacy I built. Do you understand me?" The irony of his threat was almost too delicious to handle. He was threatening to withhold an inheritance that he no longer controlled. He was threatening to kick me out of a financial empire that I currently owned. I looked at his red, furious face and then at my mother, who was smiling smugly at my supposed downfall. They expected me to break. They expected tears, begging, and frantic apologies. Instead, I carefully laid my black silk gown back onto the freshly made bed. I smoothed out the dark fabric with my hands. I looked up at my father and offered a slow, polite nod. "Okay, Dad," I said softly. "If you want me to sit with the catering staff, I will sit with the catering staff. I will not make a scene during the ceremony." My immediate calm compliance completely threw him off balance. He blinked rapidly, his anger momentarily stalling because he had absolutely no argument to fight against. He opened his mouth to yell again, but closed it when he realized I was yielding to his punishment without a single fight. He adjusted his expensive silk tie uncomfortably. "Good," he finally muttered, his voice losing its thunderous volume. "See that you do. Do not make me regret letting you stay in this building." He turned around and marched out of the suite. My mother quickly followed him, eager to continue complaining about me in the hallway. Chloe lingered for just a second longer. She tossed the shredded lavender dress onto the floor like a piece of garbage and gave me a wide, victorious smile before turning on her heel and prancing out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the quiet suite. I looked down at the ruined purple fabric on the floor and let out a rich, genuine laugh. My father thought he was banishing me to the shadows. He thought he was forcing me to eat with the help. What he did not know was that my crisis management firm owned the massive parent company that supplied the luxury catering vendor for this exact hotel. I was not being banished to sit with the help. I was walking directly into my own command center. The stage was perfectly set and they had just handed me the microphone. I took my time getting ready. I carefully slipped the custom black silk gown over my shoulders and let the heavy fabric fall perfectly into place. It fit like absolute armor. I applied a fresh coat of deep red lipstick, brushed my hair into a sleek, straight style, and slipped on a pair of classic black heels. I did not look like a disgraced sister who had just been kicked out of a bridal party. I looked like a chief executive officer preparing to hostily take over a boardroom. I grabbed my small leather clutch, making sure my phone and the heavy titanium keycard were safely inside, and walked out of the penthouse suite. The elevator ride down to the main lobby was quiet and smooth. When the polished metal doors slid open, the chaotic energy of the wedding day immediately hit me. Guests were already beginning to arrive for the early afternoon ceremony, milling around the grand foyer in their expensive suits and brightly colored dresses. I bypassed the crowded greeting line and walked down the long, carpeted hallway that led toward the grand ballroom. Before I could reach the heavy double doors at the back of the hall, I heard loud, obnoxious laughter echoing from a nearby alcove. Marcus was standing there, surrounded by three of his groomsmen. He was wearing his custom velvet jacket, with a fresh white orchid pinned perfectly to his lapel. He was holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch and holding court like a king among his loyal subjects. When he saw me walking down the hallway, his laughter abruptly stopped. His eyes scanned my black silk gown, and a cruel, arrogant smirk slowly spread across his face. He stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. "Well, look who decided to actually show up," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. The groomsmen snickered behind him, exchanging amused glances. "Dad told me he put you in your place this morning. I see you still refuse to go buy a proper dress. Wearing black to my wedding is a pathetic cry for attention, Maya, but honestly, it suits you. You always did look like a storm cloud hanging over my success." I looked at his smug face and felt absolutely nothing but cold anticipation. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought my silence and my dark clothing were signs of a bitter, defeated woman who had been successfully banished to the shadows of his glorious day. "You look very confident today, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice soft and perfectly even. "I am just heading to my assigned seat. I would not want to disobey Dad's direct orders and ruin your perfect aesthetic." His smirk widened into a full, victorious grin. He took a sip of his scotch and stepped aside, making an exaggerated sweeping gesture with his arm. "Good," he mocked. "The catering staff entrance is right through those swinging doors at the back. Try not to get in the way of the waiters while they serve the real guests. And Maya, do not forget, you have until midnight to wire that $40,000. If you behave back there and send the money, I might ask Dad not to completely write you out of the legacy." I offered him a polite, completely empty smile. "Enjoy your ceremony, Marcus," I replied. "I will be watching very closely." I walked past him and his laughing friends without a single backward glance. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors that separated the opulent front of house from the hidden service corridors. The moment the doors swung shut, the atmosphere completely changed. The soft classical music and the smell of expensive perfume vanished. They were instantly replaced by the sharp, bright fluorescent lights, the clattering of silver trays, and the loud, organized commands of a highly efficient kitchen staff preparing a massive $200,000 banquet. I walked past a row of stainless steel prep tables where dozens of line cooks were carefully assembling expensive appetizers. Nobody paid any attention to me at first. In the chaotic environment of a luxury hotel kitchen, a woman in a black dress was just another shadow. I navigated through the bustling maze of servers and rolling carts until I reached the main staging area just behind the ballroom curtains. A sharp professional woman in a crisp black suit was standing near a massive digital seating chart, holding a tablet. It was Sarah, the regional event director. 6 months ago, my crisis management firm had aggressively acquired the massive hospitality group that owned this specific catering company. We had restructured their debt and saved them from bankruptcy. Sarah knew exactly who I was because I was the one who had personally signed off on her recent promotion. When Sarah looked up from her tablet, her eyes widened in immediate recognition. She quickly stepped away from the busy servers and walked toward me, lowering her voice to maintain discretion. "Ms. Higgins," she said, her tone filled with complete respect and slight surprise, "we were not expecting you to physically inspect the venue operations today. If the executive board needed an audit, I would have prepared a full brief." I smiled warmly at her. I always appreciated absolute competence, and Sarah was one of the best operators in my entire portfolio. "Relax, Sarah. I am not here to audit your kitchen," I said smoothly. "I am actually a guest today. Technically, I am the sister of the groom." Sarah blinked, processing the information. She looked down at her digital seating chart and frowned slightly. But Ms. Higgins, you are not listed at the VIP family tables. The groom specifically requested that Amaya Higgins be seated at the rear vendor table near the kitchen exits. I know, I replied, my smile turning a little sharper. My family felt that placing me with the vendor staff would be a fitting punishment for a minor disagreement this morning. They believe I am sitting back here to eat with the help and learn my proper place in society. Sarah's expression hardened. She was a smart woman and she instantly understood the toxic family dynamic at play. How would you like me to handle this? She asked, tapping her tablet. I can have security escort them out, or I can immediately reconfigure the head table. You own the building. I shook my head. No. Leave the seating arrangement exactly as it is. I have a much better vantage point from the back anyway. However, I do need you to make a very specific adjustment to the billing protocols for the reception this afternoon. Sarah immediately readied her tablet. Tell me what you need. I looked through the small gap in the heavy velvet curtains out into the empty ballroom, where the massive ice sculptures were already set up. My brother has an open bar tab authorized on a corporate credit card, I explained, keeping my voice low. That card is currently tied to a logistics company that I placed into a hard asset freeze at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. The banks are currently processing the holds. The card will swipe successfully for the initial authorization, but it will permanently decline when you attempt to process the final massive charge during the reception. Sarah nodded, her fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up the specific financial file for the wedding. I see the card on file here, she confirmed. I want you to let the guests drink freely for exactly 15 minutes after the reception officially begins, I instructed. Let Marcus feel like the wealthy host he is pretending to be. But the moment that 15-minute mark hits, I want you to run the manual authorization for the full bar tab. When the bank inevitably declines the transaction, I want you to shut down the alcohol service completely. Do not accept any secondary cards from him. You will walk directly up to the head table and clearly inform the groom that he has insufficient funds to cover the drinks. Sarah looked up from her tablet, meeting my eyes with a sharp, understanding gleam. It will be done exactly as you have asked, Ms. Higgins. I will personally deliver the message to the groom. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to go find my assigned seat. The show is about to start. I walked out of the kitchen and took my place at the small high-top table hidden in the shadows at the very back of the room. I smoothed my black silk dress and crossed my legs comfortably. Out in the grand foyer, the orchestral music began to swell, signaling the start of the ceremony. Marcus thought he had trapped me in a corner. He had absolutely no idea that I had just locked the doors to the entire building. The orchestral music swelled louder, filling the massive space with a dramatic classical piece that Marcus probably chose because he thought it sounded like something European royalty would play. From my secluded table near the kitchen doors, I had the perfect, unobstructed view of the entire ridiculous spectacle. The grand ballroom had been transformed into a grotesque display of financial hemorrhage. Thousands of imported white orchids hung from the ceiling in elaborate cascading chandeliers. The aisle was covered in a thick custom white carpet monogrammed with their intertwined initials in heavy gold threading. Every single floral arrangement, every crystal goblet, and every velvet draped chair was bought on credit that my firm legally owned. I was essentially sitting in a room decorated with my own money, watching a man pretend he was a billionaire. The procession began with agonizing slowness. The groomsmen marched down the aisle first, wearing the rented luxury velvet jackets that matched Marcus. They were followed by the bridesmaids, who were stuffed into the hideous lavender chiffon dresses my mother had tried to force on me earlier that morning. Looking at the cheap synthetic fabric under the harsh venue lighting, I was even more grateful for the scissor incident. My parents walked down the aisle next. My father Richard puffed out his chest, looking incredibly smug as he nodded to the guests on Chloe's side of the family. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo and a smile so wide it looked painful. My mother clung to his arm, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing the role of the emotional wealthy matriarch flawlessly. Then the heavy double doors at the front of the hall opened wide and Chloe appeared. She walked arm in arm with her father, Arthur, whose smile looked incredibly strained under the weight of his impending federal tax auction. Chloe's dress was an absurdly massive ball gown, covered in heavy lace and sparkling beads that caught the light with every step. She glided down the monogrammed carpet, looking like the absolute picture of old money Boston elite. She kept her chin held high, projecting a completely fabricated aura of superiority. Marcus watched her approach from the altar, with tears standing in his eyes. He actually looked genuinely moved. He thought he was watching his financial salvation walk toward him in a white dress. She thought exactly the same thing about him. The mutual delusion was almost poetic. The officiant, a distinguished-looking man with a deep, booming voice, welcomed the crowd and began the standard proceedings. He spoke at length about honesty, integrity, and the sacred bond of building a life together. I took a slow sip of my ice water and crossed my legs, listening to the absolute hypocrisy echoing through the speakers. Honesty and integrity were completely foreign concepts to the two people standing at the altar. Then came the vows. Marcus took Chloe's hands in his and leaned close to the microphone. He cleared his throat and delivered a speech that sounded like a poorly written corporate press release. "Chloe, you are my perfect equal," he declared, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I promise to lead our family with strength. I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to honor you in richer or poorer. I vow to give you the beautiful life you deserve and to build an empire by your side." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. In richer or poorer. It was the most hilarious sentence spoken all day. He was currently poorer than almost everyone sitting in the room, holding a negative net worth of over $2 million. He was promising her an empire that had already been quietly legally seized by the sister he had banished to the catering section. Chloe wiped a delicate fake tear from her cheek and spoke her vows into the microphone. "Marcus, you are my rock and my wealthy provider," she said, emphasizing the word wealthy just enough for her parents to hear. "I promise to stand by your side in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad. I vow to build a legacy with you that will last for generations. I give you my heart and my absolute trust." Her absolute trust was currently banking on his corporate accounts to pay off her parents' tax fraud penalties. They were both standing in front of 500 people, a priest and God completely lying through their perfectly whitened teeth. It was a masterclass in manipulation. A broke man marrying a broke woman, both entirely convinced they had successfully conned the other into a lifetime of financial security. "Do you, Marcus, take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the officiant asked. "I do," Marcus answered loudly and proudly. "And do you, Chloe, take Marcus to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Chloe replied, beaming at the crowd. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Marcus pulled Chloe into a dramatic cinematic kiss, and the entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. The string quartet immediately struck up a joyful, upbeat melody. My parents jumped to their feet, clapping aggressively and cheering. Chloe's parents let out massive sighs of relief, clearly believing their financial nightmare was finally over, now that the marriage certificate was legally binding. I did not stand up. I did not clap. I simply reached into my small leather clutch and pulled out my encrypted phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim lighting of the back corner. I opened my secure email application and found the drafted message I had prepared the night before. It was addressed directly to the lead dispatcher of the Commercial Repossession Agency, waiting exactly 2 blocks away. The message was short and clear. "The legal wedding ceremony is concluded. The targets are now occupied at the reception venue. Execute the repossession of all associated luxury vehicles immediately." I looked up from my screen, watching Marcus and Chloe turn to face the cheering crowd. They raised their joined hands in the air, looking like conquering heroes. They were at the absolute highest peak of their completely fabricated mountain. It was going to be a very long, very painful drop to the bottom. I tapped the screen and hit send. The email vanished from my outbox, flying through the secure servers to trigger the final phase of my plan. Outside in the warm Atlanta afternoon, a fleet of heavy-duty tow trucks was already firing up their engines and turning onto the main boulevard, heading straight for the hotel valet. Inside the ballroom, the oblivious guests continued to clap and cheer for the newlyweds. I slipped my phone back into my purse and stood up, smoothing the dark silk of my black dress. The boring part of the day was finally over. The reception was about to begin, and I was very ready for the real show. The transition to the grand ballroom was a chaotic flood of rustling silk dresses and expensive colognes. I stayed behind the crowd, allowing the guests to filter into the reception area before I slipped through the heavy wooden doors. The room was a shrine to financial irresponsibility. Seeing the physical manifestation of $200,000 of stolen corporate funds was truly staggering. The ceilings were completely hidden beneath suspended gardens of imported white wisteria. In the center of the room, a circular bar carved from solid ice was fully stocked with top-shelf liquor. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos moved seamlessly through the crowd, carrying silver trays piled high with beluga caviar and fresh oysters flown in just hours ago. I walked directly to my assigned table, located at the very back of the room next to the swinging kitchen doors. It was the perfect hidden vantage point. From here, I could see every fake interaction playing out perfectly under the bright light of the massive crystal chandeliers. Chloe's family claimed the prime real estate near the massive 5-tier wedding cake. Her parents, Arthur and Eleanor, held court like visiting royalty. They acted incredibly elitist, making an obnoxious point of inspecting the vintage on the wine bottles before allowing waiters to pour. I watched Eleanor send back perfectly seared scallops, claiming they were too pedestrian for her refined palate. She did this while ignoring the fact that her own bank accounts were frozen by the government. They treated the catering staff like garbage, snapping their fingers to demand faster service. My father, Richard, aggressively mingled with Chloe's wealthy relatives, holding a glass of scotch and laughing too loudly at jokes he did not understand. He desperately tried to match their old money energy by overcompensating with loud stories about our family business. My mother, Brenda, followed Chloe's mother around like an obedient lapdog, nodding enthusiastically at every snide comment Eleanor made. They were all participating in a massive collective delusion. They were a room full of broke, desperate people pretending to be billionaires while swiping a credit card about to permanently decline. I checked my watch. 10 minutes had passed since the reception began. Guests were ordering double shots of expensive bourbon and vintage champagne by the bottle. Marcus stood near the ice bar, laughing loudly with his groomsmen while swiping his corporate card to keep the tab open. I saw Sarah, the catering manager, standing near the kitchen entrance. She caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was locked. The 15-minute grace period was almost up. Suddenly, the upbeat jazz music faded out. A loud tap echoed through the surround sound speakers. Marcus stood at the head table holding a gold microphone. He tapped it twice to get the room's attention. The chaotic chatter slowly died down as all 500 guests turned their attention to the golden child. Marcus adjusted his custom velvet jacket and flashed a bright, practiced smile. He looked completely intoxicated by the power and the attention. He was the center of the universe, ready to deliver his masterpiece. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice booming confidently through the massive room. "We are surrounded by so much love and so much incredible success. When I look out at this room, I see the absolute pinnacle of high society." Scattered, polite applause broke out from Chloe's side of the family. Marcus soaked it in, closing his eyes for a brief second before continuing. "You know, building a legacy is not an easy task," he said, pacing slowly behind the head table. "My grandfather started our family logistics company with nothing but a single truck and a dream. But it takes a true visionary to transform a modest local business into a massive international empire. When I took over as chief executive officer, I promised my father I would elevate the Higgins family name to heights this city has never seen. I promised him generational wealth. And looking at this beautiful $200,000 reception, I think it is safe to say I delivered on that promise. My father beamed from his seat, raising his glass of scotch. He had no idea his son had just publicly confessed to corporate embezzlement on a live microphone. I am a self-made man, Marcus continued, his voice rising with manufactured passion. I built my empire through ruthless negotiations and sleepless nights. I modernized our infrastructure. I expanded our fleet. I took the heavy burden of leadership onto my shoulders so that my family would never have to worry about anything ever again. And let me tell you, the economy has been tough. The markets have been completely unpredictable. But real leaders do not make excuses. Real leaders make millions. The audacity of his speech was physically nauseating. He stood there taking full credit for a company he had completely destroyed in less than 3 years. He had not modernized anything. He had taken out predatory commercial loans to lease luxury cars and buy expensive watches. He was a fraud in a velvet suit demanding worship from a crowd of strangers. Marcus turned to look at Chloe sitting beside him with adoring wide eyes. And then I met Chloe, he said, his tone softening into something resembling romance. A woman of class. A woman whose family understands the heavy weight of true legacy and the importance of maintaining an elite standard. Chloe, you are my perfect partner. Together we are going to conquer the world. We are completely unstoppable. The crowd erupted into massive applause. Chloe's parents clapped politely, their faces tight with relief. They actually believed every single lie he was feeding them. Marcus held up his hand to quiet the room, preparing to deliver his final devastating blow. He was not satisfied with just elevating himself. He needed to push someone else down. And I knew exactly who his target was going to be. Marcus scanned the massive ballroom, holding the golden microphone tightly in his hand. His eyes swept over the wealthy guests, the towering ice sculptures and the expensive floral arrangements before finally locking onto my small table hidden in the shadows near the kitchen doors. A cruel, vindictive smile spread across his face. I want to take a special moment to acknowledge someone very specific tonight, Marcus announced, his voice echoing loudly through the state-of-the-art sound system. He pointed directly at me. The bright spotlight operated by the venue technician swung aggressively across the room, illuminating my table. Suddenly, I was the center of attention, sitting entirely alone in my black silk gown next to the swinging metal doors. I want to thank my older sister Maya for showing up today. Marcus continued, adopting a tone dripping with fake pity. I know it was incredibly difficult for her to make the trip down from New York. And I know it was even harder for her to sit in the back row today, especially since she could not afford to contribute financially to this beautiful celebration. A collective uncomfortable murmur rippled through the grand ballroom. Guests shifted in their velvet chairs, exchanging shocked glances. Bringing up financial contributions during a wedding speech was incredibly tacky, but Marcus was completely blind to his own lack of class. He was entirely focused on inflicting maximum emotional damage. But we believe in family, Marcus declared, pressing his hand against his chest in a gesture of absolute hypocrisy. We believe in forgiveness. Even when certain family members choose to run away from their responsibilities and abandon the family business, we still leave the door open for them. We even let them sit with the catering staff just so they can experience a taste of true success. A few of his groomsmen snickered loudly from the head table. Chloe leaned over and rested her head on his shoulder, projecting the image of a supportive, loving wife dealing with a difficult relative. My mother Brenda beamed with pride from the front row, taking a slow sip of her champagne. My father Richard crossed his arms and nodded sternly, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. I did not flinch. I did not look away or lower my head in shame. I sat perfectly upright in the harsh glare of the spotlight, maintaining a cold, blank expression. I let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. Because of the heavy responsibilities required to maintain this level of wealth and status. Marcus continued, his voice turning incredibly serious. We have had to make some very difficult executive decisions regarding the future of the Higgins family name. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang heavy over the 500 guests. Dad and I had a very long, very serious talk this morning, Marcus announced. To ensure the absolute future and security of our international logistics company, we have officially agreed on a change in leadership and inheritance. We have legally decided that the entire family legacy, the business equity, and my late grandmother's estate will formally pass solely to me and my beautiful new wife, Chloe. We are building a modern dynasty, and we simply cannot afford to have dead weight holding us back. A loud collective gasp erupted from the crowd. It was an incredibly brutal public shaming. To officially disinherit a sibling in front of hundreds of high society guests and extended family members was a level of cruelty that shocked even the most elitist people in the room. Whispers broke out instantly. People were staring at me with a mixture of deep pity and sheer horror. My father stood up from his chair at the VIP table and began to clap slowly and aggressively. My mother quickly joined him. They were publicly endorsing the total humiliation of their only daughter. They thought they had finally put the ultimate scapegoat in her place permanently. They thought this public execution would break my spirit and force me to crawl back to New York in absolute disgrace. Chloe's parents, Arthur and Eleanor, practically vibrated with excitement in their seats. Hearing the word estate officially declared on a microphone was music to their bankrupt ears. They looked at each other with wide, relieved eyes, fully believing their massive federal tax debts were finally going to be paid off by the incredible wealth of the Higgins family dynasty. Marcus lowered the microphone, basking in the shocked reaction of the crowd. He looked directly at me, his eyes shining with pure malicious victory. He thought he had delivered the ultimate checkmate. He thought he had completely destroyed me. I slowly reached for the crystal water glass sitting on my small table. I took a calm, measured sip of the ice-cold water. I looked down at my watch. The gold hands clicked perfectly into place. Exactly 15 minutes had passed since the reception officially began. The grace period was over. I looked across the massive ballroom and locked eyes with Sarah, the catering manager, who was standing near the main bar. She was holding her digital tablet and staring directly at me. I gave her a single sharp nod. Sarah immediately turned and walked briskly toward the head bartender. I watched her tap the screen of her tablet and point toward the central ice bar. The bartender looked confused for a second before swiping the black corporate credit card Marcus had proudly left on the counter. The digital terminal flashed a bright, angry red light. Declined. I set my water glass down on the table. The spotlight was still shining directly on me, illuminating the dark silk of my dress. I did not shrink away from the bright light. Instead, I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. The whispering in the room immediately intensified as I rose to my feet. Every single eye tracked my movement. They expected me to run out of the ballroom in tears. They expected me to hide my face in shame and flee from the overwhelming humiliation my brother had just inflicted upon me. I stepped out from behind the small table, holding the heavy red legal folder securely in my right hand. I did not scream. I did not cry. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a corporate executioner. My dress swept silently across the pristine marble floor. I walked straight past the cheap seats, past the whispering guests, and past the VIP section where my parents were sitting. I walked directly up to the center of the head table, right into the lion's den. The band leader, who was preparing to start the next song, froze, holding his baton in the air. Marcus looked down at me, his arrogant smile faltering slightly as he realized I was not running away. He gripped the microphone tightly, his knuckles turning white. "What are you doing?" Maya Marcus hissed, leaning over the table, his voice low and threatening. "I told you to stay in the back. Get out of here before I have security drag you out." I ignored his threat. I looked at the band leader and gave a sharp cutting motion with my hand. The musician immediately lowered his baton and stepped back from his stand. The room fell completely dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft clinking of ice melting at the bar. I reached out and calmly took the spare microphone resting near the extravagant 5-tier wedding cake. I clicked the power button on. The green light illuminated instantly, indicating the microphone was live. I looked up at my brother, my new sister-in-law, and my parents. The time for silent compliance was officially over. Since we are making public financial declarations, Marcus, I think your new in-laws should know exactly what they married into. My voice cut through the heavy, suffocating silence of the grand ballroom like a sharpened steel blade. I did not yell, and I did not sound hysterical. I sounded exactly like a woman who held every single winning card in the deck and was simply tired of waiting to play them. Marcus lunged forward across the white linen tablecloth, attempting to aggressively snatch the gold microphone directly out of my hand. I simply took one calm, measured step backward easily, avoiding his frantic, desperate grasp. In his reckless panic, his arm caught a tall crystal champagne flute, sending it crashing onto the table. The expensive vintage wine spilled rapidly, soaking into the pristine white cloth like a spreading dark stain. I looked directly at Chloe's parents. Arthur and Eleanor were sitting rigidly in their velvet chairs at the prime front table, their faces completely drained of all color. They had spent the entire evening acting like untouchable royalty, and now their supposed wealthy kingdom was about to be exposed in front of 500 high society guests as a complete and utter mirage. I addressed them directly, keeping my tone conversational, but ensuring my voice projected flawlessly through the state-of-the-art sound system. Arthur and Eleanor, you have spent this entire weekend looking down on my family, I said, watching their eyes widen in absolute horror. You have turned your noses up at the luxury catering you have made, snide passive-aggressive comments about our background, and you have acted as though your daughter was settling for a much lesser class of people. You only tolerated this loud, extravagant wedding because you firmly believed my brother was a highly successful chief executive officer. You genuinely thought he was a self-made millionaire who could swoop in and rescue you from your own massive, catastrophic financial failures. Loud, shocked gasps echoed from the Boston elite side of the room. Wealthy relatives and business associates began whispering frantically to each other. My father Richard aggressively pushed his chair backward, letting it fall to the floor with a loud wooden crack. He stood up, his face purple with intense rage. "Shut your mouth right now, Maya!" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. He turned his furious gaze toward the back of the room, waving his arms wildly. "Someone cut the power to that microphone immediately. Turn off the sound system right now." But the sound engineer standing by the massive digital mixing board was a direct employee of the Venue Management Group, a corporate group that my crisis management firm currently owned. The engineer simply crossed his arms over his chest and looked the other way, completely ignoring my father's furious, frantic commands. The green light on my microphone remained steadily illuminated. I had absolute total control of the room. I turned my attention back to Marcus. The confident, arrogant groom who had just spent 10 solid minutes bragging about building a modern dynasty was suddenly visibly shaking. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked exactly like a cornered, terrified animal, realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. "You stood up here just minutes ago and eagerly took full credit for a logistics company that our grandfather built from the very ground up," I said, my voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. "You bragged to this entire room about your ruthless corporate negotiations and your brilliant international expansion. But we both know that is a complete fabricated lie. You did not build a single thing, Marcus. You inherited a highly profitable, well-oiled machine and you drove it straight into a brick wall because you cared significantly more about custom velvet suits and luxury car leases than you did about basic operational ledgers." Chloe gripped Marcus by the arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into his expensive jacket sleeve. She frantically demanded to know what I was talking about. She asked him repeatedly if this was some kind of terrible, elaborate joke designed to embarrass her family. Marcus could not even look her in the eye. He kept his gaze locked firmly on the spilled champagne, avoiding the terrified, questioning look of his new bride. His chest heaved with rising panic as the reality of his total exposure settled in. My mother Brenda covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud dramatic wail from the front row. She wailed that I was maliciously ruining the most important and beautiful day of their entire lives. She begged me to stop talking, to put the microphone down, and to go back to my seat in the shadows. She still foolishly believed she could control me with public shame and emotional manipulation. She had absolutely no idea that the deep shame she was feeling right now was only the very beginning of the nightmare they had actively built for themselves. I reached down and held up the heavy red legal folder for the entire massive room to see. The bright spotlight caught the thick embossed seal of my corporate acquisitions firm stamped right on the front leather cover. "This is not a joke, Chloe," I stated plainly, making sure she heard every single word. "This is a highly detailed certified forensic accounting report of your new husband's incredible corporate success. It is a legally verified record of every single fraudulent financial charge, every missed commercial loan payment, and every single desperate lie he has told to keep up fake appearances for your wealthy family." The entire ballroom was completely captivated by the unfolding disaster. No one was drinking their expensive cocktails, no one was eating the imported caviar. The white tuxedoed waiters had completely stopped moving, freezing in place near the kitchen doors. Everyone was entirely focused on the absolute public destruction of the golden child. I walked slowly, deliberately, along the front of the head table, making sure every single person sitting in the front rows could clearly see the thick, heavy stack of authenticated legal documents I was holding. "Marcus, you wanted to publicly disinherit me tonight," I said, bringing my gaze back to my terrified brother. "You wanted to stand on a stage and make sure everyone in this room knew that I would never see a single dime of the family legacy. You thought you were delivering the ultimate final punishment to the scapegoat sister you always despised. But you cannot disinherit someone from an empire that no longer belongs to you. You cannot fire the person who actually signs your paychecks. And you certainly cannot threaten a woman who holds the absolute legal right to destroy everything you pretend to own." I lifted the heavy red legal folder and dropped it squarely onto the white linen tablecloth right in front of him. The loud slap of the thick documents hitting the table echoed sharply through the microphone, making several guests in the front row flinch. I looked at him with absolute disgust. "You are not a chief executive officer, Marcus," I stated, my voice perfectly steady. "You are a massive liability. Your logistics company defaulted on its heavy commercial loans over 6 months ago. You hid the notices and you kept spending. My crisis management firm quietly bought your defaulted debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. I own 80% of the corporate equity. You have been funding this fake luxury lifestyle with my money. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially fired for corporate embezzlement." The blood drained completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale ash. His knees visibly buckled under his tailored trousers, and he had to grab the edge of the table with both hands just to keep himself standing upright. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, breathless gasp escaped his lips. The arrogant golden child, who had just demanded worship from 500 wealthy guests, was suddenly reduced to a trembling, terrified fraud. He stared down at the red folder, as if it were a venomous snake about to strike him. He did not even try to deny the allegations. He could not defend himself because he knew every single word I said was the absolute, undeniable truth. My father Richard exploded. The shock finally wore off, giving way to pure, unfiltered rage. He lunged out of his chair at the VIP table and charged the head table, knocking over a massive glass floral arrangement in his blind fury. White orchids and heavy water crashed onto the marble floor, but he did not even notice. He reached across the spilled champagne, desperately clawing at the microphone in my hand. "That is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking with intense panic and fury. "That is completely illegal, Maya. You cannot just steal a family business in the dark. I built the foundation of that company." I handed it to him. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage. I will sue you for every single dime you have. Give me that microphone right now and apologize to your brother before I call the police." I effortlessly stepped out of his reach, keeping the microphone pressed close to my mouth. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every single syllable was sharp and perfectly enunciated for the entire ballroom to hear. "It is perfectly legal, Dad," I replied, my voice ringing with cold, clinical authority. "Under Section 363 of the Federal Bankruptcy Code, a secured creditor has the absolute right to purchase defaulted commercial debt. When Marcus failed to make 3 consecutive payments on his predatory high-interest loans, the commercial bank triggered the default clause. My firm executed a lawful asset purchase agreement authorized directly by the Central Banking Authority. I did not steal anything. I bought his massive, expensive failure." My father froze, his hands suspended in the air. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. He was not used to people fighting back with actual facts. He was used to screaming until people simply surrendered. But you cannot scream away federal bankruptcy law. And as the majority shareholder, I continued staring directly into my father's terrified eyes. I executed a legal proxy vote at 8 o'clock this morning. I formally terminated his employment under state corporate fraud statutes. The forensic accountants I sent into his office yesterday afternoon have already seized his digital servers. They documented every single fraudulent charge. They tracked the fake vendor invoices he created to funnel company money into his personal accounts. They even tracked the $200,000 he stole to pay for the ice sculptures, the caviar, and the vintage champagne you are currently drinking. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the crowd. People began setting their expensive drinks down on the tables, suddenly realizing they were consuming stolen goods. "That is impossible," my father stammered, his loud, booming voice suddenly reduced to a weak, pathetic whisper. He turned to look at Marcus, who was still gripping the table and staring blankly at the floor. "Tell her it is a lie, Marcus. Tell these people she is a jealous liar. Show them the real financial ledgers." Marcus did not move. He did not speak. A single drop of sweat rolled down his pale forehead and landed on the red leather folder. His complete silence was the loudest confession in the entire room. My father stared at his golden child, and the reality of the situation finally crashed down upon him. The heavy weight of his son's massive failure physically crushed his arrogant posture. His shoulders slumped and he took a stumbling step backward away from the table. He looked around the silent ballroom, seeing the disgusted, judgmental faces of the Boston elite he had tried so desperately to impress. The high society connection he worshipped was crumbling right before his eyes. I reached out and flipped open the heavy red cover of the folder. I pulled out a thick stack of bank statements printed on crisp white paper and tossed them across the table. They fanned out over the spilled wine, displaying highlighted negative balances and massive overdraft fees. "Look at the numbers, Marcus," I demanded into the microphone. "Read them out loud for your new in-laws. Tell them about the $400,000 line of credit you opened using fake collateral. Tell them about the phantom employees you put on the payroll just to siphon cash directly into your personal checking account." Chloe finally broke her paralyzed silence. She let out a shrill, piercing scream that made the microphone feedback whine sharply. She grabbed the lapels of Marcus' jacket and began violently shaking him. "Say something," she shrieked, her carefully crafted old money facade completely shattering. "Tell me she is lying, Marcus. You promised me you had millions in offshore accounts. You promised me you were going to wire the money to my parents' bank tomorrow morning. If you are broke, what happens to my family? What happens to the Boston house?" Marcus could not even offer her a fake apology. He just stared at her with hollow, terrified eyes. His silence confirmed her worst nightmares. She let go of his jacket as if it were on fire and stumbled backward, knocking over her own chair. She covered her face with her hands and began sobbing uncontrollably, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed through the quiet room. My mother Brenda rushed forward, trying to wrap her arms around Chloe, but Chloe violently shoved her away. "Do not touch me!" Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my mother. You lied to us. Your entire family is nothing but a bunch of poor, pathetic scammers. You tricked us into this. I stood there watching the chaos erupt around me. I felt no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt only the cold, satisfying clarity of justice finally being served. I had spent my entire life being pushed into the shadows by these people. They had demanded my money, my obedience, and my silence to fund their ridiculous delusions. But I was not the quiet, obedient scapegoat anymore. I was the architect of their complete financial ruin, and I was executing the blueprint flawlessly. Chloe continued to sob loudly, her face buried in her hands. She peeked through her fingers, glaring at me with red, puffy eyes. The massive white ball gown that had looked so majestic earlier now just looked like a ridiculous costume on a terrified little girl. She stomped her expensive heel against the marble floor. You are completely ruining everything, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. This was supposed to be my perfect high society wedding. You have no right to come in here and destroy my family. We are good people. We come from real money. You are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to tear us down because you will never belong in our world. I slowly turned away from my father and Marcus. I leveled my gaze directly at Chloe. Her shrill, defensive screaming was the final push I needed to completely dismantle the remaining half of this pathetic charade. High society. Chloe. I asked, my voice dripping with cold mockery. Please stop embarrassing yourself in front of these people. Your pathetic act might have fooled my desperate social climbing father, but it never fooled me for a single second. Chloe's parents, Arthur and Eleanor, simultaneously gasped. Arthur stood up, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Now see here, young lady, Arthur sputtered, attempting to muster some fake aristocratic authority. I will not sit here and allow you to speak to my daughter or my family in this completely disrespectful manner. We are the victims here. We were deceived by your fraudulent brother. I turned my attention to Arthur, offering him a chilling smile. You are not a victim, Arthur, I replied smoothly. You are a co-conspirator in a massive financial fraud. You just happened to bet on the wrong losing horse. Arthur blinked, completely caught off guard by my direct accusation. What on earth are you talking about? He demanded, his voice wavering slightly. I heard your daughter crying in the ladies' room last night during the rehearsal dinner, I announced, projecting my voice clearly over the microphone. She was frantically whispering on the phone to Eleanor. She was begging her to just smile through the dinner and tolerate our tacky family for 48 more hours. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hand to her chest. She looked around the room, seeing the shocked and judgmental faces of her own invited guests, turning toward her. And do you know why she was begging? I continued, pacing slowly in front of the head table. She was begging because your family is completely, entirely bankrupt. You have 3 federal tax liens filed against you in Boston for years of unpaid property taxes. The bank has already issued the final foreclosure notices, and your beautiful historic family home is going to public auction next month. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Guests from the Boston side of the room, who had spent the entire evening looking down on my family, were suddenly whispering frantically to each other, pointing at Arthur and Eleanor. The illusion of their old money superiority was shattered into a million tiny, unfixable pieces. That is an absolute lie! Eleanor screeched, her voice pitching incredibly high. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She is just making things up to deflect from her brother's criminal behavior. Arthur, do something. Defend our honor. Arthur stood frozen, completely unable to speak. The truth had hit him so hard he could not even formulate a coherent lie. It is not a lie, Eleanor, I said, pulling my phone from my small leather clutch. Public tax records are remarkably easy to find when you know exactly where to look. I had my legal team in New York pull the official county documents this morning. Your debt is a matter of absolute public record. You have absolutely zero cash left. I turned back to Chloe, who was now shaking uncontrollably. You married my brother because you firmly believed his fake logistics empire would provide the endless cash flow you needed to save your parents from total financial ruin. You thought you had secured a wealthy savior who could quietly pay off your federal tax debts. And Marcus married you because he thought your fake high society status would legitimize his crumbling empire and eventually bail him out of his $2 million corporate debt. I looked back and forth between the two of them, letting the absolute poetic justice of the situation hang heavily in the air. Congratulations to the happy couple of scammers, I announced, my voice ringing with finality. You are both entirely bankrupt. You both lied through your teeth at the altar, and you both absolutely deserve each other. You built a massive, delicate house of cards on a foundation of complete lies, and I just kicked the table out from under you. Chloe's legs finally gave out. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing hysterically into the spilled vintage champagne. She pounded her fists against the table, ruining her perfect manicure. "It is all gone," she wailed, her voice muffled by the wet tablecloth. "We have nothing left. We are going to lose the house." Marcus remained completely silent. He stared blankly at the wall behind me, his mind completely shattered by the weight of his total public exposure. He had lost his company. He had lost his fake wealth. And he had just realized his new wife was just as broke and desperate as he was. My father Richard stood trembling near the ruined floral arrangement. His entire worldview had just been violently destroyed. The high society connection he had worshipped and sacrificed my childhood for was nothing but a cheap, desperate illusion. He had pushed me away, belittled my achievements, and constantly demanded my financial obedience, all to secure a place in a world that did not even exist. "You ruined us," my father whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaotic murmurs of the stunned guests. He looked at me with eyes full of tears and absolute hatred. "You planned this entire thing. You came down here just to destroy your own family." "I did not plan your terrible financial decisions, Dad," I replied coldly. "I did not force Marcus to embezzle corporate funds, and I certainly did not force you to blindly trust a family of tax evaders just because they are white and from Boston. You destroyed yourselves. I just brought the receipts." My father stared at me, as if he were looking at a complete stranger. The veins in his forehead throbbed violently against his flushed skin. For my entire life, he had been the undisputed dictator of the Higgins family. He had controlled every narrative and crushed every dissenting opinion with his booming voice and his heavy wallet. But standing there among the ruined white orchids and the spilled vintage champagne, he had no weapons left. His financial leverage was entirely gone, and his social standing was permanently shattered. The Boston elite he so desperately courted were now whispering behind their hands, looking at him not with respect, but with absolute revulsion. He looked at Arthur and Eleanor, who were busy arguing viciously with each other, completely ignoring him. He looked at Marcus, who was still staring blankly into space, entirely broken by his own exposure. The realization that he had sacrificed his actual legacy for a cheap imitation of wealth finally pushed my father over the absolute edge of reason. He lunged forward, his heavy fists crashing down onto the white linen tablecloth with a deafening thud that made the remaining crystal glasses jump and shatter on the marble floor. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving under his expensive custom tuxedo. He pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at my face. "You are completely dead to me, Maya!" He roared, his voice echoing violently through the silent ballroom. He did not care anymore who was listening or what the high society guests thought of him. He was operating on pure primal rage. "You are no longer my daughter. I will make sure you never step foot on my property again. I am calling my estate lawyer right now. I am officially disinheriting you from my house, and I will strip you of every single asset attached to the Higgins name. You will get absolutely nothing." The massive room held its collective breath. 500 guests sat completely paralyzed, waiting to see if the banished scapegoat would finally break under the ultimate parental rejection. Being permanently disowned and thrown out of the family home was the greatest threat my father possessed. It was the nuclear option he had held over my head since I was a teenager. He stood there with his chest puffed out, expecting me to finally crumble to my knees and beg for his mercy. He expected the fear of losing my childhood home to force me into submission, just like it always had when I was younger. I looked at his red, furious face. I looked at the shaking finger pointed at me. I felt no fear. I felt no sadness. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound peace. I stepped away from the head table and took a slow, deliberate breath. The microphone felt cool and heavy in my hand. I locked eyes with my father, delivering a gaze of absolute ice. "You cannot disinherit me from a house you do not own. Dad," I said, my voice perfectly calm and lethal. The words cut through the tense air like a physical blade. "I am the sole trustee of Grandma's estate. The deed to that property has been entirely in my name for 10 months, and I authorize the complete foreclosure of your house this morning." My father froze, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the statement. His shaking fingers slowly lowered to his side. His mouth hung open, but his booming voice had completely abandoned him. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the impossible truth I had just delivered. My mother Brenda let out a short, terrified gasp from her seat in the front row. She dropped her lace handkerchief and gripped the edge of her chair, her knuckles turning stark white. She knew exactly what I meant. She remembered the secret massive loan they had begged Grandma Theodore for 3 years ago. The loan they had secured using the family home as collateral, and then conveniently stopped paying the moment Grandma fell ill. They had assumed the massive debt would just quietly disappear into the family trust when she passed away. They had absolutely no idea that Grandma had legally transferred that specific trust directly to me before she died. I opened the red folder one last time and pulled out a heavy document stamped with the official blue seal of the county clerk. I placed it gently on the table right next to the forensic accounting report. "You defaulted on the loan 14 months ago, Dad," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional, as if I were simply concluding a standard corporate meeting. "Grandma knew you were reckless, and she knew you would try to steal her remaining assets to fund Marcus and his ridiculous lifestyle. So she legally bypassed you. She put everything into a blind trust, and she put me in charge of it to protect the legacy. I gave you a 10-month grace period while I lived in New York. I gave you 10 months to reach out to check on me, to act like a real father. Instead, you completely ignored my existence until you needed a $40,000 bailout for a fake wedding. The legal eviction notices were served to the property exactly 1 hour ago. You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my premises." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The band members stared with wide eyes from the stage. The catering staff stood completely still near the kitchen doors. My father slowly sank back into his chair. The aggressive dictator was completely gone, replaced by a broken, aging man who suddenly realized he was entirely homeless and heavily in debt. He stared at the official county document sitting on the table, unable to look away from the embossed seal. He reached out with a trembling hand but stopped inches from the paper, pulling back as if it were burning hot. He had spent his entire life building an empire of lies, relying on bullying and intimidation to keep everyone in line. But his intimidation meant absolutely nothing against federal bankruptcy codes and legally binding property deeds. He had threatened to throw me out on the street, and in return I had legally evicted him from his own reality. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and defeated. The fierce, arrogant fire that had burned in him for decades was completely extinguished. My mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly as the reality of their impending eviction settled over her. She would have to pack up her expensive department store clothes and leave the sprawling brick colonial house she loved to show off to the neighbors. There would be no more country club dinners. There would be no more bragging about generational wealth. They were returning to the absolute bottom, and they were taking their golden child with them. I stood in the center of the massive room, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire life. The invisible chains of family obligation and toxic loyalty had been completely shattered into dust. As the profound silence stretched over the room, the reality of the situation finally breached the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom. The orchestral music had died completely, leaving a hollow, ringing echo in the massive space. The band members began quietly packing their instruments into their velvet-lined cases, wanting no part of the unfolding disaster. Then a loud, sharp whistle pierced the air coming from the back of the hall near the massive ice sculpture bar. It was the head bartender executing the orders Sarah had relayed exactly on schedule. The bartender raised his voice, projecting over the stunned crowd. "The open bar is officially closed," he announced, his tone unapologetic and firm. "All corporate credit cards on file for the groom have been permanently declined by the issuing bank. Any further drink orders must be paid for with cash or a personal card immediately." A collective groan of disbelief rippled through the wedding guests. People stared at their half-empty glasses, suddenly realizing the lavish hospitality was entirely fake. But before the disgruntled murmurs could escalate into full-blown complaints, the main entrance doors of the ballroom swung open with a heavy, violent thud. Four large men wearing dark, heavy-duty utility jackets and carrying thick metal clipboards marched directly into the $200,000 reception. They did not care about the imported white orchids hanging from the ceiling or the delicate crystal chandeliers. They were commercial repossession agents, and they were here to collect my property. The lead agent, a tall, heavily built man with a thick beard, scanned the room with practiced efficiency. He locked his eyes on Marcus and his groomsmen and bypassed the confused, wealthy guests, walking straight up to the ruined head table. Marcus Higgins, the agent, demanded, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded instant authority. "We are executing a federal repossession order on a white 2023 Ferrari Spider and 3 black luxury sport utility vehicles registered under your corporate business account. Hand over the electronic keys right now, or we will simply tow them out of the valet lot with the alarms blaring for everyone in the city to hear." The groomsmen, who had been laughing and mocking me just hours earlier in the hallway, suddenly looked completely terrified. The confident swagger they had carried all weekend vanished in an instant. They frantically reached into their custom velvet jacket pockets and tossed the heavy electronic key fobs onto the white tablecloth as if they were holding live grenades. They did not want any part of federal fraud charges or commercial bankruptcy proceedings. They physically backed away from Marcus, treating their former king like a highly contagious disease. Marcus did not argue. He did not puff out his chest or try to negotiate. With trembling, weak fingers, he reached into his own pocket and produced the bright red Ferrari key, placing it silently next to the others on the table. The lead agent swept the keys into his heavy jacket pocket, checked a box on his clipboard, and marched out of the room without saying another word. Seeing the ultimate symbol of his fake wealth literally carried out, the door broke whatever tiny, fragile thread of sanity Chloe had left. She let out an ear-piercing, hysterical shriek and lunged across the spilled champagne. She grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his unpaid jacket and began violently hitting his chest with her fists. Her heavy white lace ball gown rustled aggressively with every strike, and her expensive beaded veil was ripped from her hair, falling into the puddle of wine on the table. "You ruined my life," she screamed, her face contorted in absolute fury and desperation. "You promised me an empire. You promised me you would save my family. You do not even own the car you drove me here in today. You are entirely worthless." Marcus did not even try to defend himself or push her away. He just stood there, letting her hit him, his eyes completely vacant and dead. Arthur and Eleanor, Chloe's parents, did not try to intervene. They did not rush forward to comfort their hysterical daughter or separate her from the groom. They took one look at the completely destroyed Higgins family, the repossessed keys, and the massive crowd of whispering, judging elites, and decided to cut their losses entirely. Arthur grabbed Eleanor's arm, and they practically ran toward the exit, pushing past the confused waiters. The high society illusion they desperately needed was dead, and they were fleeing the crime scene, abandoning their daughter to deal with the fallout. It was in the middle of this spectacular, chaotic collapse that my mother Brenda finally found her voice. She had watched her husband lose his mind, her son lose his fake empire, and her own house slip entirely out of her grasp. She scrambled out of her chair at the VIP table, tripping slightly over the hem of her expensive pink dress, and ran directly toward me. She did not look angry anymore. She looked like a desperate, panicked animal trapped in a burning cage. She reached out and grabbed my bare arm, her manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "Maya, please," she begged, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, completely ruining her expensive mascara. "You have to stop this right now. You have proven your point. You are the smart one. You are the successful one. But you cannot do this to us." She shook my arm, trying to force me to look at her with sympathy. "We are blood, Maya. We are your family. You cannot put your own father out on the street. You cannot let your brother face federal embezzlement charges. Fix this, Maya. Please just call your lawyers in New York and fix this right now. You have millions of dollars," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "You can easily afford to pay off that commercial debt. You can afford to let us keep the colonial house. What is a few $1 million to someone with your kind of wealth? If you just clear his accounts right now and apologize, Chloe will calm down. The Boston family will forgive us, and we can just pretend this was all a terrible misunderstanding. You have the power to save this entire family today. You owe us that much, Maya. I carried you for 9 months. We put food on your table. You cannot just destroy us and walk away." I looked down at the woman gripping my arm. She was not apologizing for decades of emotional neglect. She was not apologizing for watching my father verbally abuse me, or for allowing my brother to blindly steal from our grandmother's legacy. She was not sorry for forcing me into the shadows or letting Chloe cut up my bridesmaid dress. She was only sorry that the money had finally run out. She still viewed me entirely as a tool, a financial safety net, designed to catch them when their own sheer arrogance and incompetence caused them to fall. Even now, standing in the absolute ruins of their own making, she felt completely entitled to my hard-earned money. I stared down at my mother's hand still gripping my bare arm. Her manicured fingernails were digging sharply into my skin, but the slight physical discomfort was absolutely nothing compared to the massive lifetime of emotional weight she had continuously forced me to carry. She was crying real tears now, but they were entirely tears for herself. She was mourning the sudden violent loss of her pristine colonial house, her expensive country club memberships, and her fake social standing. She was not mourning the loss of her daughter. I reached over with my free hand and firmly pried her trembling fingers off my arm one by one. I stepped back, creating a rigid physical boundary that perfectly matched the massive emotional wall I had finally built between us. "Blood does not give you the right to bleed me dry." "Mom?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register that cut through her hysterical sobbing. "You did not carry me for 9 months just so I could be your permanent financial safety net. You did not raise me just so you could have a reliable punching bag while you put Marcus on a golden pedestal. Well, the pedestal just collapsed under the weight of his own massive incompetence." My mother gasped, loudly clutching her chest, as if I had physically struck her. She looked around the massive ballroom, desperately hoping my father or anyone from the wealthy Boston family would step in and defend her honor. But the room was completely paralyzed. No one was coming to save her. "I am entirely done being the designated scapegoat for this family." I continued, keeping my cold gaze locked firmly on her terrified face. "I am completely done fixing the massive, catastrophic mistakes you actively chose to ignore. Grandma Theodore left me the estate because she knew I was the only person strong enough to stop this incredibly toxic cycle. The free ride is permanently over. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your designer clothes and vacate my property. If you leave so much as a single scratch on the hardwood floors before you hand over the keys, I will deduct the repair costs directly from whatever pathetic pension Dad has left." She crumbled completely. My mother physically folded in on herself, sinking heavily to her knees right there on the pristine marble floor amidst the spilled vintage champagne and the crushed imported white orchids. She covered her face with her hands and wailed a loud, ugly sound of absolute total defeat. I slowly turned my back on her and took one final comprehensive look at the ruined head table. The grand high society illusion was completely destroyed. Marcus was still standing there, frozen in place, looking like a hollow, empty shell of a human being. His expensive velvet jacket was stained, and his arrogant, confident smirk was gone forever. Chloe was sitting on the wet floor surrounded by her torn lace veil, screaming viciously at the venue staff who were actively avoiding eye contact with her. My father remained slumped heavily in his chair, staring blankly at the red legal folder I had left sitting on the table. The legally binding documents containing his residential eviction notice and his son's corporate termination were the only tangible things he had left in the entire world. They were entirely, completely broken. And for the very first time in my 33 years of existence, I did not feel a single tiny urge to reach out and put them back together. The heavy, suffocating guilt they had carefully programmed into me since childhood had completely evaporated into thin air. I owed them absolutely nothing. I turned and began walking down the center aisle toward the heavy wooden exit doors. The massive crowd of wealthy Boston guests parted from me immediately, stepping back quickly, as if I were dangerous royalty. No one whispered as I passed them. No one dared to make eye contact or offer a single word of judgment. They simply moved out of my way in stunned, absolute silence. I pushed open the heavy brass handles and stepped out of the grand ballroom, leaving the chaos, the hysterical screaming, and the generations of extreme toxicity entirely behind me. The hotel lobby was blissfully peaceful. The soft ambient jazz music playing quietly over the hidden lobby speakers felt incredibly soothing after the violent, aggressive noise of the reception hall. Philip, the front desk concierge, caught my eye from across the wide marble floor and gave me a small, deeply respectful nod. I nodded back, my black heels clicking steadily and confidently against the polished stone as I walked directly toward the revolving front doors. I stepped out into the warm, humid Atlanta evening. The thick, southern air wrapped around me, but it no longer felt heavy or oppressive. The massive hotel valet area was completely clear of my brother's rented luxury fleet. The heavy-duty commercial tow trucks were already long gone, carrying away the absolute last remnants of his fake corporate empire. A sleek, immaculate black Maybach glided smoothly up to the curb, its dark-tinted windows reflecting the bright, glowing hotel lights. The private chauffeur, wearing a crisp, tailored black suit, stepped out immediately and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slipped into the spacious, luxurious back seat, feeling the soft, premium leather firmly support my tired muscles. The heavy car door clicked shut instantly, muting the loud, chaotic sounds of the busy city street outside. I let out a long, slow breath. The deep, cool air-conditioned oxygen filled my lungs, and a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute freedom washed over my entire body. I pulled my encrypted phone from my small leather clutch and glanced at the glowing screen. There was a brief automated message from David, my lead corporate attorney in New York, confirming the logistics company bank accounts were fully secured and the heavy locks on the commercial warehouse doors had been officially changed. The hostile acquisition was completely finalized. The chauffeur glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression perfectly professional and completely unfazed by the drama inside the hotel. "Where to this evening, Ms. Higgins?" he asked, his voice smooth and highly respectful. I leaned my head back against the plush leather headrest and closed my eyes, letting the tension completely drain from my shoulders. A genuine, incredibly peaceful smile spread slowly across my face. I was no longer the forgotten scapegoat sister. I was no longer the reliable financial punching bag. I was the sole trustee, the majority corporate shareholder, and the absolute, undisputed master of my own destiny. "To the airport, please," I replied, my voice remarkably steady and incredibly light. "I am going home." Maya's story is a powerful reminder that sharing blood does not give anyone a free pass to disrespect your boundaries or drain your resources. For decades, her family cast her as the reliable scapegoat. They expected her to quietly fund their grand illusions while absorbing their constant emotional abuse. The most profound lesson we can take from her journey is the absolute necessity of establishing unbreakable personal boundaries. Society often teaches us that family loyalty requires endless sacrifice, even when it costs us our own mental peace and financial stability. We are heavily conditioned to seek the approval of the very people who constantly try to tear us down. But Maya bravely chose a different path. She realized that her true worth was never defined by her father's desperate need for high society validation or her brother's arrogant delusions. She stepped out of the dark shadow they forced her into and quietly built her own undeniable strength. Setting boundaries is rarely loud or hysterical. As Maya perfectly demonstrated, true power is incredibly calm and carefully calculated. It is the quiet, profound realization that you no longer have to participate in a highly toxic dynamic just because you were born into it. When we finally stop pouring our hard-earned energy into people who only view us as a convenient safety net, we immediately create the space to build a life of genuine respect and authenticity. Walking away from a toxic family environment is never an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It takes immense courage to leave the familiar pain of toxic relatives, but the absolute freedom waiting on the other side is entirely worth the struggle. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace, please share your story in the comments below and subscribe to join our community of healing.